What is the scariest/creepiest theory you know about? That all intelligent life kills itself point. So the theory started out with a Fermi Paradox. Basically there are so many planets in this galaxy, let alone the entire universe, that it is statistically impossible that we are the only planet that developed intelligent life. So where is everybody? Well, the secondary theory is that every intelligent species reaches the point where they have a technology that can kill their entire species, and that the vast majority end up killing themselves at that point. Those who survive this time in their history are so rare that we haven't found them, and they haven't found us. As a species we reached that point in our history with the discovery of nuclear weapons, and we're at the height of risk during the Cold War, at least thus far in our collective history. But there are various technologies that could bring a species to this point in their history. This would mean that while so far we've survived, that it's statistically unlikely we will survive long term. The first man in space, some Russian cosmonaut whose name I can't remember, was not the true first. The actual first was a cosmonaut whose mission was unsuccessful, and he either died in orbit or on re-entry. Once it became apparent that he was doomed, the Russian authorities cut off communications, leaving him to die in isolation, and covered up the existence of the mission. Edit. Some corrections are called for. Op asked about theories, which I thought this was, but the facts are pretty well settled. First man in space was Yuri Gagarin. Sorry for not knowing that without googling, geez. The story I described was of Komarov, and his fatal mission occurred after Gagarin's historic first. What was theoretical was the story of a group of cosmonauts who did predate Gagarin, who were abandoned upon mission failure, and whose distress calls were heard and recorded by amateur radio. I had a vague recollection of this theory, and was confusing it with Komarov's story. This theory has been widely debunked. That humans almost went extinct 70,000 years ago. A volcano in Indonesia erupted. There's theories that we have a genetic bottleneck around that time. Took our population down to 10,000 to 3,000, like the size of one small town. Lots of fresh genetic material died with those who were lost, and the resulting inbreeding could have resulted in some genetic diseases that have made their way into humans today. Without this event, we may have advanced faster and be healthier people today. Edit. Link. Edit 2. Thank you for the awards. When I went to sleep this had 5 upvotes and now it's 10k. I'm glad that so many people found this interesting. I'd like to clarify that this is a theory, a hypothesis supported by a collection of facts. The theory is not fact and truth in itself, so don't take it that way. I have gotten a lot of messages where people think that I'm spreading falsehoods about this, and I want to address that there is counter evidence against the volcano causing a genetic bottleneck. There is still evidence of the genetic bottleneck and the recent and abrupt diversification of humanity. Most of the research that I've seen on this comes from 2000. It's been 20 years, so there has been lots of work done on this very topic in the time since. The point is, don't take it as fact. The thread asked for scary theories, and I provided a scary theory, not fact. For more information and supporting evidence that human beings diversified recently, we can look at stories like Cheddar Man, a dark-skinned, blue-eyed man that lived around 10,000 years ago in England. I have also been getting a lot of questions about if we have genetically improved as a species from this. The short answer is I don't know, and I don't think anyone does. I think it's unlikely, as I've never heard of a population bottleneck going well. Pain does not equal gain, and survival of the fittest hasn't really applied to people for a long time, and for a variety of reasons. We tend to protect others that are weak, because those that are different still have purpose and use to the community. We care about each other and want to see everyone succeed. This line of thinking, that we must have become stronger from such a critical state, seems far too close to eugenics. The theory that there is an infinite number of parallel universes branching out at each moment with all possible outcomes for each situation. Let's say this is true, and you play Russian roulette. 5 out of 6 of possible you would live and 1 would die, but no matter how many times you play, there would always be versions of you that would survive. This would give those versions of you the illusion of immortality. This would mean that no matter the risks you would take, there would always be some version of you that would survive. If this is true, it would mean that you could live your life completely free of the fear of death and take on any risk. But the only way to know if this is true is to expose yourself to high odds of deaths repeatedly. Also, this would mean that as time passed there would always be a more decrepit and invalid version of you surviving, maybe forever. Anyways, that all is at people. Edit. As numerous people have mentioned, this is apparently called quantum immortality, not immorality. And no, I'm not an anti-Semite. I had a professor in college who taught physics, and he explained why we will likely never come across aliens. The universe is about 14 billion years old. Over the course of that time, it's likely that intelligent life, besides life on Earth, has existed. However, 14 billion years is an insanely long time. Other life forms have probably risen and fallen thousands of times over. Extreme dynasties with technology we can only dream of having have probably existed. Life forms could have lasted hundreds of thousands of years and still not even be close to our timeline. The chances of other intelligent life forms existing at the same time as humans, in the 14 billion years the universe has hosted a possibility for life, is really unlikely. Statistically, intelligent life to have formed, prospered, or even existed at the same time as humans is extremely small simply due to the absolute drop in a bucket that we are in terms of time. We may very well be completely alone in the universe. The dark forest theory. This explains the Fermi Paradox, why we haven't seen any other advanced life forms despite the vastness of the universe. Other advanced life forms don't send out signals into the rest of the universe because they are worried that something more advanced and dangerous is going to find them first. There's another idea that other civilizations know there's something out there, but don't send any signals, because it has no reason to not wipe out the entire planet. There's a science fiction book based on this, and I think this quote explains it better than I can. The universe is a dark forest. Every civilization is an armed hunter stalking through the trees like a ghost, gently pushing aside branches that block the path, and trying to tread without sound. Even breathing is done with care. The hunter has to be careful, because everywhere in the forest are stealthy hunters like him. If he finds another life, another hunter, angel, or a demon, a delicate infant, a tottering old man, a fairy or demigod, there's only one thing he can do: open fire and eliminate them. The theory basically asks, if there's other intelligent life out there, why haven't we seen them? This means that if there really are aliens out there, and there have been for centuries, why have none been conclusively spotted? If you really think about it, there should be tons of alien evidence all around the visible universe, if they have gotten to the point of interstellar travel. But there isn't, so that means something is stopping any advancement before it can get to that point. Essentially, there is a barrier that all other life has not been able to get past, which lies somewhere on the path of evolution and advancement. That barrier is most likely extinction. Humans are getting incredibly close to traveling beyond our home planet. With this theory in mind, the main concern is whether humans have not yet reached that barrier, or if we have passed it. If we have not reached it yet, then we are doomed to the same fate of other theoretical intelligent life. But if we pass it, we are lucky and may be able to travel the stars. In fact, we could very well be the first ones to make it. But we just don't know where the barrier is. Edit. Thanks for the silver. More of a philosophical idea rather than a theory, but Solipsism. The idea that you are the only one that is real and that exists in this world. Everyone else and everything else is fake or is an illusion. Edit. People seem to liken Solipsism with imaginary worlds. They are not the same. It's not too much a matter of imagining things, therefore manifesting a better world for yourself isn't a thing. It's more of just questioning if anything outside of yourself is even real. It doesn't mean you have the intelligence or power to consciously make everything up. It just means you can't really prove any other's consciousness except your own. You're self-aware, but not world-aware. I should also clarify I do not adhere to this idea, but have definitely at some point entertained it. Edit too. So many people are saying they thought of this as a child. I did too. What if we all thought this because we had a reason to? What if our first instincts were right, but adulthood washed it away? Now I'm kidding, or am I? there's a high likelihood that there's far more serial killers out practicing their craft today than there were back in the 1970s. The supposed height of serial killer activity. Content edit. One of you lovely people found an Atlantic article that talks about the possible increase of serial killers in today's age. Link is here. Also stop awarding me. There's places that can do better with the money than Reddit. Here's a center for missing exploited children. Lots of murders, serial or not, happen to the littlest people. Help out a cool organization. Another one is RAIN. There are many victims of serial murderers, other scumbags, that fall into the category of people that would benefit from an organization like RAIN. Edit. I got a wholesome award fucking lolololdo. Thanks you /Honey Bahan. I am glad my early 20s fascination with serial murder entertained you enough to award me. Edit 2. My inbox is teetering from how full it is. Edit 3. Thanks you /YoungWitWipe you /Detonahatekid. Yeah, all good people. I'd also like to take this opportunity to thank the likes of Ted Bundy, the BTK Killer, Jeffrey Dahmer, Jack the Ripper, the Night Stalker, the Beltway shooters, all y'all faked up people that I had an interest in learning about some 20 years ago. Thanks Officer Conway of the Seattle PD for telling me you're faking weird, for wanting to know about that sheet, inspiring me to keep looking into it. Look at me now Conway lol Edit 4. Now my second highest comment, and it's about serial killers. The conversation below includes questions such as, are you a serial killer? Hehe, I'm in legal danger. Telling this story makes me feel uncomfortable, even today, so I will tell it here. I don't know how much this story fits into this thread, but I've never had a platform that seemed appropriate to share it. So here we go. When I was 14 years ago, I moved from Iowa to Boulder, Colorado with my best friend Corey. We moved there during the month of August, and shortly thereafter I got a phone call from a number one didn't know. I answered it, and it turned out to be this girl that had attended the same high school as us, Ashley. Ashley had heard that Corey and I had just moved to Boulder, and she was calling because she too had just moved to Boulder to attend Cubic. She wanted to know if we wanted to get together sometime and hang out /party. Ashley was a couple years younger than us, and we didn't run in the same crowds, so we didn't hang out much. But I remember her coming over to our apartment to smoke and chill once. Then I remember asking her to get us weed. She did. She came with us to a party once, and I also remember us asking her for weed a second time, and her texting me back saying, you guys just message me when you want weed. So no. After that I don't think we talked to her again. Fast forward 3 to 4 years. Corey and I are living back in Iowa. One night, I was out with a couple of people I'd gone to high school with, and we went to this dive bar called Thumbs. In the back of Thumbs there is a single pool table, which is where my group went, because we had planned on playing. We got to the pool table, and there's Ashley, racking a set of pool balls. I was super surprised to see her there, so I walked right up to her and said something like, Ashley, long time no see. What are you doing here? Did you move back from Boulder? Ashley just stared at me for a second and then said, what? So I repeated myself and say, did you move back from Colorado? I haven't seen you since we hung out in Boulder. She looked truly confused, and then she said, what are you talking about? I never lived in Boulder. At this point I thought she was faking with me, because I specifically remembered hanging out with her more than once. So I laughed and was like, you're faking with me, right? She shook her head no, and one of the girls I was with, who knew both of us, actually overheard it and butted in to confirm that Ashley had lived in our hometown the whole time. I completely dropped the subject to save face, but the experience was so unsettling that I made a beeline for the front door. I walked out onto the sidewalk, pulled my phone out of my pocket, and called Corey. I said, Corey, do you remember when we lived together in Boulder and Ashley came over and hung out with us? And Corey said, no man, that never happened. He was my best friend, so I knew he wasn't faking with me. Plus there was a 0% chance he and Ashley had ever talked to set something like this up. When I pressed the issue, he insisted that no one we had gone to high school with had ever moved out to Boulder, and that we certainly hadn't hung out with them. Since then, I've brought this up to Corey several times and his position has never changed. To this day, I don't know what happened. I specifically remember hanging out with her. She wore a tie-dye t-shirt when she came over the first time. And we hung out with her multiple times. I remember it so clearly. I still have those memories, but apparently they never happened. Even though the timeline matches exactly, she would have graduated high school that year and moved to Colorado in August for school. I know that the human memory is super unreliable, and I'm sure that's all this is, but that doesn't change that I'm absolutely 100% faking sure that this happened 14 years later, and I still stand by my story, wrong as it may be. Okay, this one is rough, so please bear with me. So the common time travel question is, would you go back and kill baby Hitler? Well, imagine if that was you. To us in the current timeline, you would be a hero that killed someone truly evil before they had chance to corrupt or endanger anyone, but to the people of that time you are a monster, a baby killer they couldn't exactly explain to people. I was sent from the future to kill this baby to save hundreds of millions of lives. No one would believe him and would just assume he was some nutcase, or maybe they're not allowed to tell anyone as per the agreement with the future government. It makes you wonder all the people through time that have been called monsters for killing babies. What if they were just heroes from the future saving us all? They couldn't tell anyone either. Edit. Wow, to awards, thank you so much. It may seem sarcastic, but it's been a rough year and this level of acceptance means a lot. Quantum immortality is scary as shit. The theory states that you will never really die. Any near-death experience you've had in your life is a point where you died in an alternate timeline, but your consciousness moved on to another timeline in your body where you survived, however close it was. If this theory is true, then that means you will never ever die, no matter what horrible things happen to you, or how decrepit and tortured your body becomes. You will one day be nothing more than a tortured pile of flesh and organs with no escape. Edit. I'd like to add that this is a theory and obviously unproven, and there is going to be variance in the theory as people explore what they think is possible, probable, and otherwise. That being said, the most frequent reply I've had has been along the lines of what happens to you if one or the other youse died and moved into your timeline. I see this occurrence as creating a new timeline rather than taking over another, much like branches on a tree. They will grow outward as well as upward. I find number stations to be pretty creepy. Their purpose is technically a theory, as the groups that broadcast them won't officially confirm even their existence for the most part. Essentially, spying is still a very real thing for most world governments. One of the most foolproof ways of delivering a coded message is through a one-time code, a code used just once before being discarded. Your spy has the key, you have the message, and once the key is used it is discarded, and the next message is sent using a different key. Additionally, shortwave radio is an extremely secure way of sending these messages. It sounds weird that a radio station anyone with a shortwave radio can listen to would be considered secure. But the beauty of the method is that shortwave radios are ubiquitous cheap technology throughout most of the world. What looks more suspicious, a person traveling with a radio, or a person traveling with a sophisticated computer or satellite phone? While the signal can be received by anyone, it leaves no record of who received it, and can't be intercepted and traced by a middleman. They don't care if you listen, because the stream of numbers is nothing without the code, and because you're using a one-time code, it can't be cracked as it's randomly generated and used once. The only time a one-time code has ever been broken was an instance where the code was reused. So your spy just tunes into the radio at a specific time on a specific day, writes down the numbers, decodes the message, discards the key, and no one is any the wiser. Most stations are identified by a call sign or little jingle, and these can range from kind of cute and cheerful to pretty eerie sounding. If you listen infrequently, you'll hear messages repeated over and over until one day they change up. It's believed they'll repeat the message until their spy can communicate they've received it. Essentially, if you have a shortwave radio, you can listen in on highly secret spy communications from countries all over the world. You can also listen in on countries jamming the communication, either by broadcasting state radio on the same signal, or trying to jam it with noise or static. You'd think the frequency of these transmissions would have gone down after the Cold War, but they are still going strong. The very first numbers stations appeared in the very early days of radio, during World War I. I find it fascinating, but also super creepy, that all of this secret communication is happening right out in the open, for us to tune into at any time, without any way of knowing who it is intended for, or what is being transmitted. The Vela incident, September 1979, a US Vela satellite detected a double flash of light over an area of the ocean between South Africa and Antarctica. The prior 41 double flashes observed by the satellite were from nuclear explosions, as this is what they were designed to observe. There also happened to be a typhoon happening in the area at the time, so it seemed like someone wanted to detonate it without being caught. The Carter administration reported that it was a natural occurrence due to a small meteorite hitting the satellite. However, many other independent sources and even other countries have reported that they did indeed find traces of fallout and radiation. Because of the geopolitical climate of the times, there's very strong evidence that it was in fact a joint nuclear weapon test carried out by South Africa and Israel. And the US scrubbed the information regarding it because they didn't want to paint their allies in Israel in a bad light for working with apartheid-era South Africa. Strangely enough, Israel and South Africa have never denied having nuclear weapons programs, nor have they ever denied a joint test being responsible for the Vela incident. In the US, but applicable anywhere, both political parties are 100%, no questions, no ifs, ands or buts, controlled by the ultra wealthy. Every single decision, maybe not every individual person, but barring major upsets, every movement that happens is planned thoroughly ahead of time. Republicans will never ever ban abortion. Democrats will never ever enact gun control. These are boogeymen, they mean nothing, but are ways to control the masses and keep us just separated enough to not talk to each other or vote differently, but not so separated that we fully disengage with the other side. The think tanks, big data conglomerates, etc. All of it is used to know to a statistically significant level exactly how 99.5% of all elections, all congressional votes, all Senate votes, and all international policy will go. We only see behind the curtain when people who wield some power don't follow the plan. McCain saves Obamacare, shocked everyone. He was dying at the time, nothing to lose. Saudi leaders had Jamal Khashoggi murdered. All of a sudden we had to abandon all our international values, the plan we all need to care about at all times, because someone with power decided to deviate from being spited. That I might be the only consciousness that actually exists out there and everyone else is some sort of AI. One version of this theory goes even further and much creepier and suggests that mine, or whoever's consciousness, is just the result of the thoughts from a Boltzmann brain. What is a Boltzmann brain, you might ask? Well, given an infinite amount of time, anything and everything that might be possible, no matter how unlikely, can and will happen, including the random emergence of a consciousness from a series of fluctuations in void. This consciousness is a Boltzmann brain. Perhaps I and my consciousness are one of these occurrences that has happened long after the death of the very last star and the evaporation of black holes in the dark, dead, cold universe of the far, far future. Perhaps everything I'm experiencing is either the pure imagination of, or some mad fever dream of this Boltzmann brain, as a way to cope with the never-ending darkness, and even more terrifyingly, maybe either Boltzmann brain will suddenly wake at any minute and all of this will be gone in an instant. And finally, as a cherry on the top of existential dread, if the base human species has a limited run, then only a limited number of humans will ever live, let alone those who experience a life in the 21st century with experiences such as writing Reddit posts like these. However, with infinite time, not only could Boltzmann brains emerge, but if they can, then with infinite time an infinite number of Boltzmann brains will emerge. This means that according to simple statistics, I have a much higher chance of being a Boltzmann brain than an actual human being with a consciousness generated by a flesh-blood brain. Any type of human trafficking, poor young kids, vulnerable women trafficked for as, kept in cages, in tiny apartments without beds or any amenities, many forcibly hooked on drugs, to keep them compliant and dependent on their owners, forced into terrifying sexual encounters, barely fed or clothed. In places like Dubai there are tens of thousands of Asian manual laborers who are essentially slaves who have their passports removed, forced to live in severely overcrowded apartments, with upwards of 30 plus men sharing a one-bedroom showbox apartments. No access to medical care, not access to legal support, paid barely enough to feed themselves. Who went into Dubai on short-term contracts to provide for their families, but unable to get home. They then lapse the legal period of their visas and contracts, which means if they go to the police to try and leave back home, they face steep fines and jail time for overstaying, which serves as a deterrent to them reaching out for help. Any of those scenarios is purely awful and terrifying to me. Okay, this is a weird one, but me and my dad saw this one guy come out of the gas station, and he was bald and pale as sheet with no hair at all. He was walking away from us as we were sitting in our truck eating, and I told my dad that he looked weird and resembled what people call a MIB, and that he might be an alien. I know it sounds dumb, but this guy just didn't look real. He looked so odd. When I said that to my dad, the guy quickly looked at me like he had heard me. He was like 20 feet away, and we had our windows up. Right when he looked at me, I panicked and did the chin down nod that guys usually do, and he nodded back and turned away, and then drove around us once and did the index finger wave, almost like he knew what I had said. But that sheet had me thinking for quite some time. I still bet to my dad that he was alien or something, because with his weird demeanor and looks he fit the profile. Not much of a theory, more of a conjecture, but fossilization is actually quite rare. It takes an extremely specific set of circumstances for a dead organism to even become fossilized, let alone survive intact to the modern day, to be found by humans. Because of this, there are likely millions of species we will simply never know about because none of them ever fossilized. For all we know, we might not even be the first intelligent species to evolve here on Earth. There could be a species that formed a civilization at some point and then went extinct later on, but we'll possibly never know that because there are no fossils that formed/survived today. It probably wouldn't have been an advanced, industrialized civilization like the kind we have today, as we would have surely found evidence for it by now, but I could easily see something on par with ancient Egypt disappear completely after millions of years. There are certain scientists. For many decades prior to 2019, they warned everyone that there would be a deadly virus pandemic that would cause tremendous numbers of human death, and especially if we did not take them seriously and properly prepare for it. The current pandemic from SARS-CoV-2, which causes COVID-19. They say this is not the big one they've been warning us about. The really bad pandemic is yet to come. These scientists are the infectious disease experts being paid more attention now, such as Dr. Fauci and others around the world. Some of us fear countries around the world will just move on with business as usual if and when we have an effective vaccine widely distributed, and go on ignoring the experts once again and fail to prepare properly for the big one. Edit. Thank you for the replies and comments. I found them interesting thus far. Some chilling, and for the wholesome awards, what fun, right? I expected this comment would be buried, and maybe no one would see it. For those asking for sources, I'll try with only a couple. For about 5 decades now, you would only need to be a non-expert average person, but had to have paid attention to these experts when they appeared in articles in newspapers, magazines, maybe some film documentaries and interviews, and possibly searched for and read journal articles. I'm not an expert, just rattled off my comment with some of what I could remember, and a bit of it from the past year since last November. Start doing some web searches and reading, perhaps search infectious disease expert predict or similar terms, and read from reputable sources such as universities, medical journals, edu, org, etc. Stop listening to politicians who ignore science and other scammers. Turn off your TV if it's your thing. This following one, from last February. I find it very accessible, fascinating, and easy to listen and understand for the average person. Preferably, get some alone time and listen to the podcast carefully. I think the first 5 or 10 minutes are all ads and can be skipped. Michael Osterholm is a well-known expert from the US who has spent his life studying infectious diseases and warning and advising public officials and anyone else who listened, and about 30 years traveling the world to study many outbreaks near the source. Alternatively, there is a video version of the same point. Take care of yourself, and please do whatever you are able to safely assist your neighbors in need. Many people are in distress right now, today, facing the streets and hunger. I always talk to the pets after we have to put them down at work, veterinary hospital, especially if the client declines to be present for the youth procedure. I hold them close and tell them how pretty and perfect they are, how loved they are. We do paw prints too when requested, so I usually talk the pet through that procedure as well. I ask for the paw, even though I'm the one who is controlling where it goes. Bagging is the hardest part. I usually tell them how important and special they are, and I wish them well on their journey across the Rainbow Bridge. I tell them that they are going to start to feel better soon, and that their illness is over, and that they fought well. And when I tie off the bag, I give it a little hug and a final I love you, and into the freezer they go. It's difficult, but it helps me to talk through it, and to treat the animal as if it was still alive and still had their dignity. I had to get my own dog laid to rest back in February, and I remember sitting with her long after she passed, just so I could tell her how much I loved her, and that she will always be my princess, and that I was sorry I couldn't do more to help her, but mostly that I was grateful to have her in my life, and that she will always live on in my heart. I like to think that she could hear me. I know she struggled at the end because she could no longer work to protect us by doing perimeter checks and chasing squirrels and pedestrians away, and this was my time to talk to her without her mind being clouded by pain. Thank you for also talking to your deceased patients. There is a condition called anesthesia awareness, which essentially means that you wake up for a specific duration of your surgery while under anesthesia. You feel, hear and even smell everything. The scariest theory is that due to the forgetful properties of anesthesia, it's possible that while under anesthesia, you are completely aware of everything and experience it all, only to forget it by the time you wake up. People who experience anesthesia awareness are those who didn't succumb to some of the forgetful properties of anesthesia. In essence, it means that you feel every cut, cauterization and hand within your body for hours on end, and then you forget it by the time you wake up. There are machines that can track brain activity, so this isn't supposed to be possible. But how much do these machines really detect? Do doctors actually use/look at them? I hope nobody has a surgery scheduled anytime soon. This is a theory that my friend came up with. If certain parts of the Catholic or Christian faith is accurate, the devil is constantly trying to manipulate people into doing his bidding and pull them away from their religious morals. So the theory is that the devil is real and he is winning by a lot. Now most Catholics will have you believe that not following their rules, or more specifically, their interruption of God's rules, means that you have been manipulated by the devil. But this actually doesn't make much sense, because the devil is also known to be incredibly cunning. So, what would be the best way to manipulate millions and millions of people away from their faith? Change the faith itself. Basically, this theory is that a very long time ago, the devil began manipulating the church itself, coming up with false narratives like the devil being incapable of entering a church, or the idea that blessed water can be used to kill/ward away demons. This would allow him to completely control the church, while letting them think they are relatively safe, and keeping the devil at bay. Over the years he has been slightly changing the rules, creating exceptions for different situations. Oh, that guy stole your food. It's okay if you just put an arrow in his back. He's the bad guy after all. You're just protecting yourself. Oh, they won't accept our religion. Go ahead and take their lives, land, and women. As long as you use the land to spread God's word, and use the women to create more faithful children, then you are doing God's work. Hey, I'm sending some good strong workers over from Africa. They are subhuman. Treat them as such. Burn the witches. Because they are definitely witches. They are trying to take away the African workers I sent for you. They are trying to take away your freedom, the very freedom I granted you. Kill them all, and go create a new country, with blackjack and hookers. Canon is totally legit, trust me. Over the years the devil had eroded all the core values of the original faith, and convinced his followers that anyone who questions their new faith is truly evil. He has created a self-repeating cycle that drags the truly faithful straight to hell. P.S. I'm not trying to cheat on anyone's faith here. I grew up Catholic and have the utmost respect for other people's faith, but I also know a lot about the history of the church, and after hearing this theory, I was shaken to my core. It literally makes a ridiculous amount of sense, and I'm not even religious anymore. The whole backward strings of the world are being pulled by a single organization. Illuminati/Freemason type sheet. For me it's not so scary as it is disappointing. History tells us that organizations that succeeded at doing these things were public and capable. Here's an actual theory, not just a bunch of wodude ideas that don't match with physics. The Boltzmann brain, there are a couple variations on it, but my favorite is this. Thermodynamics tells us the total entropy in the universe will always increase. Currently, the universe we live in is surprisingly low in entropy compared to what we expect it could/will be. Given the universe will be around indefinitely, there is a whole lot more future than there is past, kind of like, if you choose any positive number, it will be small compared to essentially every other number. Okay, so the future is a high entropy state, but it should still have random fluctuations. There is a very small chance that one of those random fluctuations could produce a Boltzmann brain that has all of the exact same memories and information and data input that you are experiencing right now. Of course, this is a random fluctuation, and as such it will immediately dissipate as quickly as it formed. Point now, assuming the future is infinite, these fluctuations will happen. And in fact, they are going to happen more than once. And in fact, should happen an infinite number of times, which means the chance that your brain and your world are actually happening now is essentially zero. And really you're just a Boltzmann brain who didn't exist a moment ago and will cease to exist a moment from now. The existence of Mothman, or humanoid beings around us around 2005 to 2007. My wife was walking in Central Park, New York City at night with an ex-boyfriend when they both saw a tall dark grayish creature with red eyes as they walked by. The best she can describe the creature is that it was about 8 feet tall or more, very dark, muscular, with big wings. It was in a squatting position, very similar to what a gargoyle would look like, as they both passed by it. According to her, they froze as they passed it. After passing it, trying to rush out of the park, and a minute went by, they described to each other what they had seen. My wife is the most genuine person I know, and she believes in her heart that it wasn't a prank, and that she really saw this being that one night. She saw it breathing deep, she described. I have looked into it for years, and the closest story/most similar event I have found is that of the theory of the existence of Mothman. There have been many sightings of the same being she described. It always makes me wonder what else is out there that we have no idea about. The universe is pretty amazing, and its potential is beyond our imagination. This is just my personal take on it, but I've always thought to myself about how the fact that myths and legends have existed for so long, even with the introduction of technology and science, you'd think that after all this time, we would have grown smarter and realized such fictional things like demons and monsters didn't exist in the world, and that by now, all of it would have been debunked. But what if they were real? As a Catholic, you learn a lot about weird shit that go on in the church. Statues of people crying blood, levitation, stories of demons and princes of hell, numerous cults all spread around the world, the existence of secret societies. These kinds of things always made me wonder. It could even be split into different explanations of why we believe and think about these things. It could be that we are just real into that kind of stuff. It could be that we are all just insane, or there could even be a shred of truth. I once read about a conspiracy theory that saints and holy men, like Jesus, were actually aliens, which explained the weird dome-like halos that artists used to draw to show they were blessed by God. There's even saints whose bodies haven't been corrupted, meaning they don't decay, which I find particularly wacky. Honestly, the fact that these kinds of beliefs have survived this long, in this changing world, has astounded me. Is our belief that strong? Or are we just madmen going bonkers over dead men and fake stories? TLDR, if stories of the supernatural have survived this long, surely there must be a reason. Are we insane, or do these entities exist in the world, constantly reappearing and reinvigorating our search for the paranormal? Personally, I wanna hear someone else's take on this. In the study of space, particularly the odds of intelligent life beyond humanity, there is a thing called the great filters. To oversimplify, there are several stages of development in every species timeline, known as great filters. Challenges they pass while still surviving. Since we don't know of any intelligent life besides us yet, there are two that I know of. Theories 1. That humanity is the first species in the universe to reach our current level of collective intelligence and we have not found others because they are still behind in development point. Or, and this is the one that scares me mostly, 2. Every species that has reached our place or further has not made it past, leading to their extinction. And thus, we are alone. Point of course, there is a great video on this done by Kurzgesagt. Fermi Paradox. Diat love pass you say. I'll raise you. Ourang Medan. 1947. Ourang Medan was a Dutch freighter who was found off the coast of Indonesia. The ship had sent various distress calls, and it took a while, since they didn't give their location for help to find her. One of the alleged messages, all officers including captain are dead, lying in chart room and bridge. Possibly the whole crew dead. The last message, I die. There was some Morse code sent, but it was gibberish. The ship was located in the Straits of Malacca by an American ship, the 6507th Silver Star. Once there, no signals were answered. So the Ourang Medan was boarded. Allegedly they found the crew and officers dead on deck, eyes opened wide with a horrified stare at the sky. Some of the bodies had arms outstretched, pointing as it were. Others were grasping something, nothing. The ship's dog was also present, dead, teeth bared. The last thing it saw was enough to make it snarl. A visual inspection showed no injuries on the bodies. More dead crew were found on the bridge, including the captain's terrified body and the communications officer in the radio room, dead. The mystery grew when the party went further into the ship, the boiler room. Even more bodies were found. But that's the odd bit. They claimed the room, which is supposed to be hot, was in fact chilly, colder than the rest of the ship. It was a hot day, a blazing 110 degrees. There are different versions of this story, with some who claim they saw a green mist in the boiler room. The non-rescue party could not find a death source during their excursion, nor could they find any damage to the ship. The idea was to let someone else figure it out and pull a tow line and tow it to port. Let the authorities deal with it. That was the plan. They returned to the Silver Star and started getting ready to leave when smoke came from the Ourang Medan hull, number 4 hole. Screw this, they cut the tow line and pushed on to get as far away as possible from that ship. They claimed there was a huge explosion and the SS Ourang Medan sank to the bottom of the ocean. The blast was so strong, the ship actually lifted off the sea for a moment, then crashed down. Was it an alien encounter or something in the cargo that produced a mass delusion? As it leaked into their water or air, toxic gases. Lloyd's shipping registry has no listing for a vessel called SS Ourang Medan, but Silver Star does. This has been a topic of long curiosity. One of the searchers found a report dating May 1952 of the Merchant Marine Council published by the United States Coast Guard. Their frozen faces were upturned to the sun, the mouths were gaping open and eyes staring. There is no real answers, a mystery. Was their registry deleted to cover up what had happened? What was their cargo, and who was the owner? Where did they want that cargo delivered? And of course, what did they see in the sky? That everything you're experiencing are nothing more than fleeting thoughts moments before your death. I have a very weird memory of going to the beach as a kid when I was 7 or 8 years old. It was a normal beach day. My parents had bought me this terrible polystyrene surfboard that didn't keep me afloat, but did give me a dreadful rash for Christmas, NZ. So, summer, I was playing out in the surf when a huge wave crashed down on me. I have the memory of floating in the water feeling absolutely at peace, which is the same sensation drowning people feel. My next memory is of packing up and heading home. I have very strong memories of me and my 2 brothers in the back seat. I was in the middle holding the big bottle of Coke still half full but warm. I spent the entire ride home shaking it up, then unscrewing the cap to watch it fizz up. After we got home and chilled it, the Coke was of course completely flat due to my car ride shenanigans. This led to a beating from my older brothers at having wasted the coke, which was a rare treat for us. I have no recollection of getting out of the water or anyone rescuing me, and from my memories of after events obviously no one in my family had any concern. It is as if it never happened. Yet I remember at points sometimes when falling asleep I have the same feeling and sensation I had when I drowned. I sometimes wonder if I'm still there, floating under the water near death from drowning, and my entire life since is just my brain creating a life for me in the moments before I die. This would explain the feelings of déjà vu I have, and how my intuition always proves to be correct, but I never act on it. I'm creating this life for myself. When I die in this life, at the very end I will be rushed back in time to that beach in New Zealand decades earlier. Or perhaps any moment now it will happen, and I will wake up to a surf lifesaver dragging me out of the water, while my hysterical mother runs towards us. If that happens, all I can say to young me is, for the love of God, buy Apple, Google and Amazon in 2000. Or perhaps I'm merely a figment of your imagination, and your brain is writing your life, while 8 years old you are dying. I'm a little late to the party, so I imagine this has already been mentioned. But here goes a disclaimer: if you're prone to existential anxiety, skip this comment. But if you are, what are you doing in this post anyway? The theory of Roko's Basilisk. Imagine if in the future, some omnipotent, malevolent AI exists, and have set out to torture anyone who didn't help it come into existence, both past and present. Now that you know about it, you are in somewhat of a dilemma. Do you spend the rest of your life trying to help this AI into existence, and by that, escape possible torment? Do you do everything you can to prevent it? Or do you keep living your life without change, now knowing that should this malevolent AI at some point exist, you would be punished? I apologize if I misremembered some of the details. It's been a while since I learned about it. The theory originates from the Less Wrong forums, where it was originally posted by a user by the name of Roko. The thread was deleted fairly quickly as it had been reported that the thought experiment had already caused psychological harm to multiple users of the forum. Kyle Hill has made a great video on the subject. The theory of the bicameral mind proposes that as little as 3 millennia ago, all humans were effectively schizophrenic. Their thoughts were seemingly not their own, but basically manifested as auditory hallucinations in the form of voices commanding them what to do. What were really their own internal impulses were perceived as gods instructing them, and this was the primary source of humans' concept of a god or gods. Once we evolved away from this brain structure, we became conscious. Specifically conscious of our thoughts as our own. To put it another way, we were now able to think about our thoughts. The anecdotes and early religious texts of gods communicating with humans is due to this phenomena. One might say that faith or modern religionism is perceived nostalgia of sorts, passed down through generations, for our former nature of consciousness. One might further say that faith is a denial or a forsaking of our own consciousness. My family is super religious, especially my family back in the Caribbean islands. My aunt called the other day to talk to my parents because she did an open book on us. To keep it simple, basically she went to a priest who told her about me, my sister, and my parents. The priest basically said, if my dad doesn't take care of his health, he'll die in 2 years from lung failure. Thing is, what my aunt didn't know is that my father is currently on meds due to lung infection. She had no idea and no one mentioned this to her, so the priest she went to couldn't know this. The priest also said my mom will soon have a bad accident. He didn't say what, but said it will be serious. Winter is coming here, so I'm afraid she might slip and hurt herself badly because she's a bit clumsy. Now I try to go everywhere with her to watch her for my sister. All that was said is she is hot-mouthed and talks back too much. Pretty accurate point for me. He said 6 months after my 29th birthday things will become bad for me. I'm 27 right now. So 2 more years. To be fair, most of my life has been a bit rough, so I'm interested in what could happen. The Tanganyika laughter epidemic is a case of mass hysteria or mental epidemic that occurred in 1962 in Tanganyika, now Tanzania. The epidemic began on January 30th, 1962, in the village of Kashisha, in a girls' boarding school opened by a Christian mission. 3 students started laughing and crying uncontrollably, and their laughter infected 95 of the 159 schoolgirls, aged 12 to 18 years. The laughter lasted from a few hours to 16 days. The laughter did not spread to the teachers, but the students could not keep their attention on their studies, which is why the school was temporarily closed on March 18, 1962. On May 21, classes tried to resume, but this could not be done. The epidemic had already got out of the village by that time, after the school closed. Students were sent home, and the epidemic spread to the nearby village of Nshamba. In April and May, 217 people experienced laughter attacks, most of them children and young people. In June, a laugh caught 48 students of a secondary school for girls Remachine located near the city of Bukoba Point at the school, where the epidemic began, filed in the court. Uncontrollable laughter swept, to some extent, all schools, Kasali and neighboring villages. The epidemic ended 18 months after it started. In addition to laughter, accompanying symptoms were reported: pain, fainting, flatulence, breathing problems, rashes, crying attacks, and screams. In total, 14 schools were closed, and more than 1,000 people were affected by the epidemic. Everyone on here is talking about where are the aliens? It's statistically impossible for them not to exist. But, if you change the goalposts slightly, that there are in fact more hurdles to getting to the point we are now than we like to admit, it's more likely that we are, in fact, alone. It's more perfectly explained in this TED Talk. Point to summarize, say there is a 1 in 1,000 chance of overcoming the barriers to life as we know it now. How many planets are there in our galaxy? 1 trillion, just for argument's sake, not an actual number. How many planets in our galaxy are habitable? 1 billion. How many stay stable for millions of years with a nice climate? 1 million. How many actually have the necessary components to form life? 1,000. How many of those evolve into intelligent life? 1. The life evolves to use sophisticated tools. 1 planet in 1,000 galaxies, then they have to have lived long enough to actually evolve sophisticated science and math. 1 planet in 1 million galaxies then, to cooperate on such a grand scale as to reach the distant stars. 1 planet in a billion galaxies then, also, not blow themselves up in the process, and also not get blasted by a meteor or other outer space life-ending event. 1 planet in 1 trillion galaxies, we might just be alone. Mandela effects in general can be, but one in particular is the man from Taured. A European looking man was passing through security in Tokyo, who claimed to be from a country called Taured, located somewhere between Spain and France. He had an official looking passport that met all the official criteria for a passport, and it appeared to have been fairly recently stamped from when he got on his plane. The issue was, there is no such country of Taured, and he did not appear in any official flight records for having boarded from anywhere. Customs officials locked his passport away in the security office and detained him in a hotel room with 2 armed guards watching the doors all night. In the morning, he was not in his room, and the passport was not in the security office. Believers in the Mandela effect believe that he came from another reality where such a country does exist, and somehow passed into our reality on his way in from his flight. And at some point in the night, he was removed from our reality, likely back to his own, or into another reality. That's Star Trek, Star Wars, Mass Effect. Like alien to human contact and civilizations are impossible. Traveling from solar system to solar system yields different time zones, and time reflects differently on other planets/solar systems. The movie Interstellar captures this theory correctly. As time flows, because of gravity, those two forces of reality, gravity and time, are conjoined in some way. Such as the theory on why UFOs travel so quickly is because they don't run on an engine that creates an outer propellant. Rather, it creates its only gravitational pull and force. That all it simply does is tilt its downforce to any 360° direction, causing the motion to make the object fall in any direction, and increasing the gravitational force. To add speed. In the movie Interstellar, they find a black hole which allows them to jump through space-time and land in another solar system, which would take years to travel by normal means. but as they land on different planets, the differentiating gravity causes time rifts that alter time. Because of the mass a planet has with its different minerals embedded in its atoms, the reason we really haven't seen alien life is because we are either in the future or in the past of certain alien planets with life. They have either died out or are just beginning in their infancy as a species. Even if they had UFOs like ships, they can't transcend time. Maybe controlling gravity does this, though it's safe to say time travel might be a thing if we are able to harness the power of gravity to our personal use. Otherwise, say goodbye to Star Trek, Star Wars, Stargate like sci-fi worlds. It will never happen. Our universe just doesn't work that way. The double slit experiment is, in my opinion, conclusive proof we live in a simulation. Basically how it works is, if you fire a ton of photons, light, through two slits from a single light source, and record where they pass through the slit, and where they hit, you'll get a scattered pattern, like this vertical bar vertical bar vertical bar vertical bar. This is because light acts like a particle and a wave, so there will be areas where the two waves meet one another and cancel each other out, and areas where they reinforce one another. If however you fire the photons one at a time, you'll get a more even distribution, since they won't have other particles to cancel out or reinforce. So far it all makes sense. But what happens if you fire one photon at a time, but don't monitor them as they pass through the slit, only recording the pattern where they hit? Since that part of the machine only records the photons on their way to their destination, you'd expect to see an even distribution, right? So you check the readings and this is the pattern you see. Vertical bar vertical bar vertical bar vertical bar vertical bar. Why is this? Well, the first thing you'd think is somehow the machine that is recording the photons as they pass through the slits must be the problem. So this time you run the experiment again, with the machine recording the photons as they pass through each slit, but with no tape in the machine, so the data isn't saved anywhere that you view it. What pattern should we see now? Vertical bar vertical bar vertical bar vertical bar vertical bar. We see the interference pattern again. So what does that mean? It means that somehow, light knows it is being watched, and acts accordingly. If it is being watched, the particles act as you'd expect. But if you aren't watching, it acts completely different. Yellowstone National Park contains a caldera supervolcano that has had 3 major eruptions in the past. 2.08 million years ago, 1.3 million years ago, and 631,000 years ago. When it erupts again, pyroclastic flows will affect Idaho, Wyoming, and Montana. Of life within 1,000 kilometers will immediately perish, and most of the United States will be consumed in ash, including the eastern seaboard, resulting in death and illness in humans and animals, crop failure, disrupted transportation, collapse of buildings, contaminated water supplies and clogged machinery. 2,000,000,000,000 tons of sulfur will be injected into the atmosphere and cloak the entire globe with sulfuric acid aerosols within 2 to 3 weeks, resulting in an average global temperature drop of 10 degrees Celsius, 50 degrees Fahrenheit. With the entire northern hemisphere experiencing an expected 12 degrees Celsius drop, this will result in crop failures, famine and starvation over the entire globe. These effects could last up to a decade before temperatures begin to normalize. Although some believe that a series of 18 non-explosive eruptions which have occurred since its last major eruption have been releasing pressure which might delay the next eruption, this is unprovable because each major eruption completely destroys the surrounding landscape, resulting in a caldera and eliminating any evidence of whether these smaller eruptions are typical between larger eruptions. Additionally, the 3 Yellowstone caldera-forming explosions are actually the last 3 of a series of at least 15 caldera-forming eruptions which have occurred over the last 16 million years, with the first known ones to have occurred at what is now the Nevada/Oregon border, and each successive eruption moving in a northeasterly direction, with the last occurring at what is now the Idaho/Montana border. This path indicates that the next eruption will not be in Yellowstone, but just northeast of the Yellowstone caldera, approximately around Granite Park, Montana. The Uncanny Valley is a psychological phenomenon in which humans automatically hate anything that doesn't quite look fully human. We are fine with cartoon characters because they have human element, but definitely don't look human. We are fine with good wax statues and paintings because they look perfectly human. But as dolls and zombies automatically repulse most people because they are almost human. This is thought to be an evolutionary trait that makes humans avoid corpses because corpses are vectors for disease and are at the Uncanny Valley's peak of disgust for most people. But there is one problem with that theory. The thing that really disgusts us and really makes us fear, hate, and revile something that looks almost human is when it moves, and I'm constantly bothered by the idea that humanity, at some point, was forced to evolve an intense disgust for either moving corpses, zombies, or a living being that looks mostly human. And having this automatic disgust was a matter of survival. The theory that we humans are not originally from Earth. I'm not taking that the makeup of life came from some meteorite. I'm talking we were quite literally exiled here tens of thousands of years ago. The theory is Earth is basically a prison planet, and our ancestors were sent here because he were criminals, kinda like what the Brits did with Australia. The theory comes about that we are so different from other species on Earth. Ancient art showing alien technology, how in evolutionary terms we haven't really bonded with nature, we can barely eat anything without modifying it in some way. How naturally as a species pretty awful and violent. The idea is we basically just forgot our past as generations went by, and over generations and generations the story of our ancestors was lost, but some parts are still there. That's what we today call religion. The whole man in the sky isn't a god. It's our story of how we came to this prison planet for being bad, and how we must be better and serve our time to be led back to our true home. The more you think about it, the more it kind of makes sense, which terrifies me. I'm just scratching the surface with this post, but there are so many good points to it. It could very well be true that all the people during the Salem witch trials were hung/murdered for being witches, when they were in fact hallucinating on a mold that grows on rye/wheat. If the weather is balmy, there was a scientist who theorized, based on the conditions of the weather, that some of the rye/wheat would have been prime for molding. Ergot is the mold associated, and is similar to LSD. One of the farmers who all three of his daughters were hung/burnt alive for being witches bartered crops for his income. Additionally, the theory was put to test when a perfectly preserved man in Salem who was murdered by being cut from ear to ear, preserved in the mud of a swamp, was at a museum in New York. They exhumed him from display and biopsied his stomach lining. His stomach lining tested positive for ergot. The Salem witches were not in fact witches, but tripping their balls off from the mold ergot found on the crops. Additionally, in France many decades ago there was a similar witch outbreak. A dog was seen bashing his own skull against a rock over and over and died. A man appeared possessed and jumped to his death from his apartment balcony. This outbreak of possessed individuals and the dog who smashed his head against a rock also had a local bakery that had moldy rye bread that was being sold. Every single event in the course of the universe has led to this specific moment. Everything, no matter how mundane it seemed at the moment. If Gavrilo Princip never stopped for a sandwich, he wouldn't have been in front of Archduke Ferdinand and couldn't have shot him. This meant no WW1. Now WW1 means nothing brings the economic downfall of Germany, so Adolf Hitler never grows angry at the Jews. No WW2. And this extends to beyond humanity. Gavrilo Philip, Archduke Ferdinand, Adolf Hitler, you, and me. None of us would have existed if some jackass monkeys started thinking. And these monkeys wouldn't even have gotten the chance to evolve to that point if some weird rodent fakers survived an asteroid that murked dinosaurs. The entire course of linear time has led to today. I wouldn't be who I was if not for my childhood friends and friends thereafter. All of this in account, you still decide to spend precious time being ahead of us. The theory that there is an infinite number of God or some other creator entities that created existence, and that there is also an hierarchy of God entities that keeps on going up infinitely, with each successively higher tier God significantly more powerful and more incomprehensible than the previous one. Let's say the biblical God is currently a tier 1 creator entity, or entities, since we don't know how to comprehend, let alone quantify God. So hypothetically there must also be a tier 2 god/god or gods which had created and continues to manage our current tier 1 god/god or gods, and then there is a tier 3 god/god or gods that watches the tier 2 god/god or gods, and it just goes on and on like that with no end whatsoever. People have in fact questioned the existence of a god creator since ancient times. However, the best answers they could come up with is either A, don't ask who created God, and B, God is all there is, so there could never be a God creator to begin with. God has revealed himself to humans in the Bible as having always existed, but it is also a possibility that perhaps the biblical God don't know about a much greater creator entity that controls every action of the biblical God, since this proposed super creator is likely also incomprehensible to our biblical God, just like how we are totally incomprehensible to microbes. People have also challenged this theory by saying that the biblical God is a so-called first God or primordial God, but that is impossible, because as stated earlier, there is no top of the God hierarchy as it goes on forever, so there would not be an original God. To begin with, it's all just a really big rabbit hole that would never have any bottom, even if we could solve our own existence itself. I recommend anyone interested in this crazy theory to read about the idea of infinite regress, since that is the core concept that this theory is based on. Those ghosts are real, and one of my mothers has been following me and watching me for years. She passed away when I was 10 years old, and ever since her death, I've had a familiar sort of tingling ache in my shoulders. Like someone is either behind you or watching you. She's not a bad spirit. I think she's watching me grow up, because she couldn't really do that in the land of the living. Oddly, I don't get that feeling when I'm on the toilet or in the shower as much as I do outside, so I think she does know her boundaries. There's a lot of interesting tools and techniques paranormal investigators use to try and communicate with ghosts. It's the TV shows that deliberately try to make ghost hunting scary that sheds a bad light on the topic, because they'll often do fake hauntings to fill in for the lack of ghosts in an area. I find the topic incredibly interesting for sure. I was gonna get that Phasmophobia game because it uses the same tools as the ghost hunters I love to watch, but then I learned it's about hunting jumpscare ghosts and my interest dropped instantly. I'm not sure anyone will ever read this or understand, but the Big Rip is the scariest theory in my opinion. String theory tells us that the universe is constantly expanding faster than light due to the creation of dark matter and dark energy. At a certain point in space, where everything is expanding faster than light, we reach what is basically the end of existence. This is the cosmic event horizon. Since the universe is expanding faster than light, this barrier of existence is constantly coming closer and closer to us. According to our current understanding, eventually the barrier will become smaller and smaller, so that it will encapsulate a single molecule, eventually getting smaller than that to an atom, then a proton, then finally a boson, and then we don't know. Everything outside the barrier is moving faster than light. Now light speed works as a cosmic telephone line for protons and electrons to communicate, so they can interact, and chemistry and physics behave as we understand. Once particles move faster than light, information cannot be shared, rarity breaks down. This might not scare some, but as an atheist, I found solace in the idea that my atoms would be scattered amongst the stars and I would essentially be one with the universe for eternity. Well, now I understand that eternity has an end. If there is a God and they created every atom and dictated the laws of the universe, is God still there after the cosmic event horizon? We understand death to come after life. That assumes a linear flow of time. Time correlates to gravity, and gravity derives from mass. So after the cosmic event horizon, death and life all happen at once, so how could there ever be an afterlife if there is no after or before? This has torn me apart existentially, and I hope that it's just due to a lack of understanding. If I'm way off base in my understanding, please let me know. I'm a studying chemist, not a physicist, so I could just be way wrong. The meowing nuns. I always think of this as a fact, but really there's no concrete way of knowing if it is true, so I guess it could be considered a theory enough to be applied to this question. Maybe it is just an interesting spooky thing, but I wanted to talk about it anyway. It's so interesting to me that I wrote/gave a speech about it and other mass hysteria cases earlier this month for a class. Basically back in the Middle Ages, a German nun began to meow and bite the other nuns in her convent, and it spread. Soon the entire convent was acting like cats, and they would stop at a specific time frequently to all meow together at the same time. Some sources say the behavior spread to convents in Italy and elsewhere. The only thing that made it stop was police/soldiers threatening to beat the nuns, which obviously snapped them out of it. One explanation is simply mass hysteria, which I've been obsessing over for years. There was a lot of stress in convents back then, since a lot of the nuns were forced there by their families, and that could have contributed to a sort of psychosis/mind break in the original subject that was adopted by the other nuns. Whatever it was, though, is fascinating to me. Our minds are so strong but so weak, and we can just imagine illnesses and things like this. Mass hysteria is really common too, just hard to document, and is literally just caused by our minds saying yeah okay that sounds about right. This isn't as terrifying as some of the others, but this is a Fermi Paradox solution I see almost no one mention. The reason we haven't discovered the aliens or they discovered us despite the size and age of the universe is because there aren't any. I don't mean like they've wiped themselves out or anything like that. I mean they just don't exist yet. The universe, while old to us, is barely a fraction of a percent through what could be considered its life. It's barely a fraction through the star-forming period of its life, let alone the multi-trillions upon trillions of years it has ahead. The reason there's no aliens is because they haven't been born yet. Someone in the cosmos has to be first on the block, and there's a decent non-zero chance that it could be us. Which means that there's no one else out there to help figure things out. Everything we do alone in the dark, because there aren't any adults coming to save us. And if we fuck up now, we don't even have the comfort of potentially having someone else know of us before nature wipes any memory of us off the face of the cosmos. TLDR, there are no aliens, because humanity might be the first intelligence to arise in the universe. I used to visit my grandma, mom's side, during summer vacations. It was the time before cell phones and grandma had this old rotary dial phone in her room. The room faced north and had one door and an adjacent window about 3 feet apart also facing north. The door was a bifold made of long wooden panels with tiny gaps between them that allowed some light through even when closed. We used to dial random numbers on the phone after closing the door so the adults wouldn't see us. One day at noon, when we were dialing numbers, I saw a silhouette in a rocking chair, rocking on the wall between the closed door and the window. I was small, but got confused as to how this was possible as we didn't have a rocking chair and the shadow was impossible to fall on that wall. I quickly turned to everyone in the room, not able to speak, to get confirmation if they saw what I saw too. Everybody agreed but nobody spoke a word. We all bolted out of that room, but to this day, are sure of what we saw. That our entire existence is a trick our brain plays on us. You might think you're experiencing reality, but you're actually experiencing an interpretation of reality. Consider this. You don't actually experience anything directly in the world at all. Your senses, eyes, ears, skin, nose, mouth, etc. take in sensory data and your brain cooks it all up into an experience. All that you experience is external data pinging your senses, that is then interpreted and constructed in your brain into something understandable to you. Where there are gaps in the data, your brain will just invent information to make everything seem cohesive and whole, but the reality is we are all living in the virtual reality of our own brains. Compound that with the fact that our bodies aren't a single organism really, but a collection of many systems working in concert. Again, our brains concoct the illusion that we are a cohesive being with a history and a single identity, when in truth we are a constantly changing jumble of biological systems combined with a neural network constantly generating the illusion of a lived reality that doesn't actually exist anywhere outside of our own brains. There's evidence that there has been an advanced civilization before the modern one, and it was destroyed 12k years ago by a planet-wide cataclysm. It appears that this civilization was global, as we are today, with many cultures communicating and sharing ideas and styles. The evidence exists in certain ancient ruins that when examined by engineers and stonemasons, they say that only advanced tools such as diamond saws could do the work that is seen. Enormous granite slabs have been shaped into perfect one-piece solid columns, perfectly fitting together gigantic bricks, laser perfect polished surfaces, and even saw marks. The sheer size of some of the slabs, as well as precision of workmanship, is pretty hard to do even today with modern machinery. There is also evidence of 2000C burning of statue and other monument surfaces, where rock turned into glass, and sometimes exploded off the surface. Some monuments have exploded altogether, with giant pieces littered over a large area, with burn marks. The most interesting evidence is on Easter Island. The quarry for the basalt rock that the statues on Easter Island are made of is underwater. The quarry would have been dry land 12k years ago, during the last ice advancement. Basalt is also a very hard rock, and the indigenous population didn't even know about metal until Europeans arrived on the island. There are 900 statues on that island. Not all of them are made of basalt, but even one would have been impossible to the Polynesian people. The most abundant evidence of a high-tech civilization is in Egypt. Engineers and stonemasons can see clear evidence of diamond tools and even drill holes with threading in some places. Of course, Egyptian civilization lasted for a very long time, so there's also plenty of evidence of the more recent works that are more crude. How many times have humans had these rounds of advanced technology? How many times did we start over from sticks and stones? Did we destroy ourselves each time? How many brilliant minds have built magnificent cities for it all to be ruined over and over? History is repeating itself again, and our nature is ultimately self-destruction. That not only are we in a simulation, but that we are all just programming within that simulation. The idea is that a particularly advanced species could run a full simulation from the beginning of the universe up until any given point, and that's what our universe is. Paranormal/supernatural things are glitches and bugs within the simulation. Technological limitations explain why we have a finite size. It's basically our resolution. Also, that's why we can't find aliens, because it's possibly humanity running a simulation of its past, so it only focuses on Earth. Also, a highly advanced quantum computer could explain how the laws of our universe function at the quantum level. I don't necessarily believe this is true, but it's terrifying nonetheless. I don't like the idea that I could just be a computer program, and that after death there's a complete cessation of self. I have my own thoughts about the afterlife or existence of self after death, but I won't rest until I get into them now. This is my own personal thing, but my whole life I've had this creeping feeling that there's something different about me, and everyone else knows it, but won't acknowledge it. I can't really explain why, but it's just something that I feel, and have felt for years. There's also the fact that strange things seem to happen around me. I don't necessarily think of supernatural things, but definitely unexplainable. Objects in my home will randomly disappear and reappear elsewhere with no explanation. I have dropped things before and they've vanished. Like, one time when I was a kid I dropped an ashtray that I was bringing outside where my family was, and I braced myself for the loud smash, but it just never happened. And the ashtray was just gone. Same thing happened with a plastic measuring jug. Dropped it while washing it, boom, gone. I've also seen living things that seem impossible. When I was very young I vividly remember seeing a small bright orange slug looking thing crawling around my backyard. It was orange and scaled. It looked sort of like a goldfish without fins. It had one eye facing upwards, and it moved fast. And it crawled under the gate in a motion like a caterpillar. When I hopped up to look over to the other side, it wasn't there. Never seen anything like it since. I've also heard whispering voices. Once, I was singing in my bedroom alone along with a song, and this voice of a woman came out of literal thin air and whispered, "Shut up." Another time, I was waiting for my mother in the car and heard a voice that sounded like it was whispering directly into my ear from behind that said my name. "You've forgotten just last night. I was up making myself soup, and I heard a man's voice whisper, 'There's something at the door.'" These are just the 3 major times that I can remember. Another thing is I have had incidents of déjà vu a lot. I'm not sure how often other people get it, but from what people tell me, most people get it maybe once or twice every few months. Cannot interfere with what happens during their déjà vu. As in, they will always do the same thing they did in their déjà vu vision. From what I know, most people will only realize they're having déjà vu in the midst of it, when it's already happening. For me, I get it before the actual event occurs, which is why I can change things. For me, not only does it happen at least once or twice every few days, but I can actually change what happens each time. Just the other week I had déjà vu about a conversation for about the 5th time. Yes, the same déjà vu about 5 times. And I decided to say what my grandfather was going to say before he did. The whole sentence, word for word. He then asked me how the fuck I knew what he would say. The conversation was political, and we were pretty deep in opinion territory, and he and I have opposing views. I've also called smaller things, like what model of car we are about to see, shit like that. Another really notable time was a few months ago. My stepbrother was staying with us, and had 2 friends over. They were standing in the kitchen talking, and I had déjà vu that one would be sitting on a chair backwards, and the other would be sitting up on the counter in front of the tea kettle, which is where I wanted to go. And sure enough, went downstairs, boom. Both are exactly where I thought they'd be. And the conversation was the same word for word. It happens a lot and nobody else seems to experience déjà vu the way I do. Maybe people have just lied to me and all of these things are totally normal, but I doubt it sincerely. Added to it, I just remembered something. It's ironic, considering what it is, that I will also randomly be missing chunks of time. Like I'll be in the kitchen making food at 5 PM, and then suddenly I'm in my bedroom at my desk, and it's 9 PM. And I remember nothing from those hours I missed. When I was 16 I started dating a guy who was 19. Yeah, I thought I was in love with him. I ended up running away with him, and moving in with him, when I was 17 to a different city away from my family. He was very jealous and quickly became abusive. When I said I wanted to leave he threatened to murder me, and my entire family and my dog. It lasted for almost 2 years. I finally had enough, and stood up to him, by putting a butcher's knife on the table one Saturday morning telling him you're either going to stab me to death right now, or I want you gone by the end of the weekend. Cause I'm already dying here. He again reiterated that he would kill me and my family, but I reminded him that the cops had recently been investigating him for having stolen property, and then if he had to go back to court again he was going to do some jail time. I told him I would call the cops and tell them what he did. He told me I couldn't testify against him because we were common law, and I came up with some bullshit law and told him that I could and I would. Well, I guess he believed me and didn't want to go back to jail because he was gone that Sunday. I found out a couple of weeks later that everyone I worked with at the bar told me his name was the Hawk. I was confused and I asked why. They said because whenever he was here and you were working he never ever took his eyes off you. It sends shivers down my spine. That demons and ghosts exist. This is why I know about it. A handful of years ago, my now ex-husband told me he saw demon smoke and ghosts. He usually only talked about it when he was drunk, and during the day I'd ask him about it, and he would acknowledge that he could, but then clam up about it. He was otherwise not speaking about hallucinations or anything. Seemed sane, so I just thought it was weird and let it go. Fast forward to a night I was bartending. We were in the process of remodeling the back part of the building, and it was old. Think tin ceilings, building, and weird stuff started to happen. Like, I heard somebody run up the stairs next to the bar into a staff area, and I thought it was a homeless person trying to hide in the building before we closed, and checked, but there was no one there. Bottle caps started getting thrown at people when they were the only people there, etc. So the night I was bartending, we were closed, doors were locked, and I was counting out my till, with my then husband sitting there at the bar adjacent to me, waiting for me to be done. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw an ink black shadow swoop near the front entranceway. I want to caveat this by saying I'd worked there for 10 years. I knew every brick, every light and shadow pattern that could possibly come through the window at the door, every light flicker in that place. And B, I'm not Christian, or from a religious background that actually believes in Satan, or demons in a form that would take black smoke. We believe in ghosts, maybe, but never in a million years would I picture a ghost being black ink smoke. So, I noticed that my husband's eyes flicked towards the smoke as well, but he didn't say anything, and I just decided that I was tired and looking at the sheet or something. But then it happened again, only this time it was right across the room, in full view of both of us, and it slowly, like in slow motion, washed through the air in a huge swoop and then disappeared. My husband and I looked at each other, and I was like, "Did you just see that?" And he said yes, described it to me in detail, and he saw the exact same thing I had, and I said, "Did you just see that?" I didn't say what I had seen, and kept talking as I frantically counted the rest of my till, and got the hell out of there. I avoided closing alone ever after that point. How is it possible that we both could see it? What could it have been? It was distinct, like the kind of stuff you CGI into scary movies. It's nothing I would have personally imagined, and honestly, I pretty much thought before seeing it that my husband just would get too drunk and hallucinate or something. We both saw the same thing. Maybe there is another explanation, but ghosts and demons is a theory I'm now willing to entertain. When I was in 9th grade, the grade younger than me, I don't think this is how it's said, had a trip to the jungle, and there is this stories of the pink dolphins in which it is said that they change into people you know and drag you into the jungle. I'm probably telling it wrong, but it was something like this. The point is that this one girl from set grade was walking around the hotel, which is located in the middle of the jungle near a river, when she saw one of her classmates walking towards the jungle, and she started calling him, but he didn't respond. So she followed him, and she saw he had gone into the jungle. But when she was about to get too far away from the hotel, another dude from her grade grabbed her by the shoulder and asked where she was going. She told her what had just happened, and all he said was that the guy was by the pool all along, and she even saw him getting out of the pool. So yeah. A few. The theory that you're already dead. The idea that you are the only real person in this reality and that there is no way to prove you aren't. So, I may be real, and you / everything else is fake, but the opposite may be true, or it may all be true or all be false. An alternative to this being that you're not dead, but dying, and everything beyond the point of dying, your life from X, is like that episode of Twilight Zone, An Occurrence at Owl Creek. Seems to be, and almost certainly is, asinine, but I once considered this for too long, and did freak out a bit as a teen. Lol. It's a way to explode your 12-year-old nephew's mind, if nothing else. Haha. Teens tend to like thoughts and theories like these. I know I did point another being that humans are the new morons to the universe, and we haven't learned yet to stfu for our own good. Basically that others are out there, have survived reaching space exploration, and have learned to stfu out of fear of something much greater and terrifying than we Earthlings could imagine. And the dumber / unlucky civilizations essentially call out to their destroyers also. The fact, in my opinion, that civilization lives on a razor's edge, and we are so much closer to just turning into savages than we dare admit. We wake up and go to work and take the kids to school and go to PTA meetings and vote and call the police and all that because the lights come on, the stores are open, the police will show up, and clean water is readily available. You can put gas in your car, etc. Remove any of that for a month and shit would likely get really nasty. We are just animals with a vague sense of civility. We are fucking chimps in suits, lol. That guy that smiles at you, and that woman that waves each day will be the first to enslave you for fun, or kill you for the slightest necessity, if things got just a bit worse. Not even all that bad, not nearly as much as you think it would take to make it so. Just a bit. Point is, that overdramatic and an exaggeration? Yeah. Probably, but not that much of one. Haha. This is a personal experience, but it's pretty spooky. Point essentially, when I was about 7 I had a near-death experience, and I've never been able to forget it. I'm in my 20s now. I ran off from my parents at a water park because I wanted to go swimming, and ended up going into a pool that was deeper than what I had expected. I couldn't swim, and I didn't have a life jacket on at the time because I had run away from my parents, and just remember struggling so hard to stay afloat, and then everything went black. Point the next thing I knew I was watching my dad pull my unconscious body out of the water, in third person, almost like something from a movie. I was standing nearby everything that was going on, but I couldn't get any closer to my parents and myself. I just felt stuck watching everything happen. Point I don't even remember shifting back into myself. I was just outside of myself, and then all of a sudden back into my body, after I got CPR. The rest of the day after that is a total blur. I think I got taken to the hospital, but the next full memory I have is from when I was waking up back in my own bed. I spoke to my dad about it when I grew up some more, and he told me what happened, and it was exactly what I saw from my third person perspective, like exactly spooky Mayo. Honestly, the government did 9/11. I don't really believe it, but there's just enough evidence to make me wonder, namely, mysterious construction near the floors which collapse the building, which people think was a way to bring down the towers, since jet fuel can't melt steel, and a single or several I-beams failing would result in a partial collapse of the building, not total. The jet fuel didn't coat every single beam point. Then you have the odd time of the attack, when if they just attacked at midday, they might have killed 50,000 people instead. Reports from the CIA warning of an attack like that, yet no action was taken, and the ability for thermite to be used to cut the beams, which in the videos are very bright flashes seen soon after the attack with no real explanation. Fire of any kind has not brought down a high-rise structure before that or since. Partial collapses happen at best, but these buildings are made redundant and fireproof as best as you can, even coating the I-beams in fire retardant. The only other high-rise to collapse completely in history is a 21-story building in Mexico City during one of their earthquakes. It doesn't have to be the US Gov who perpetrated the attack, but it would have to be someone who didn't want to kill many American civilians because they attacked early in the morning instead of midday. And the scary thing is that it makes a lot more sense than the common idea that the jet fuel weakened all the I-beams and that the fire retardant used on those beams was shaken off by the impact, as if earthquakes aren't a thing these buildings are designed to handle. I don't know where to share this. I had a near-death experience 18 years ago. After getting gunned down in front of my house, I recall dying in full detail up to the point I couldn't breathe because I got shot in the chest. I recall dying and meeting God. He talked to me about my life and he asked me why I didn't believe in him. I was just bawling at the time because I couldn't believe he was real. He showed me 3 planets, and each planet had a different color: a black planet, a green planet, and a red planet. He told me, since I didn't believe in him, I would go to the black planet. I was mortified, finding out there is a god, and I was going to hell. I felt my body give out, and I was suddenly in a room with other people that died at the same time I did. As those people started talking, I threw myself on the floor and prayed. I asked for forgiveness for not believing in him, and that if I had another chance I would tell everyone about him. Just then an angel walked into the room and said I would live and that I should keep my promise. I woke up connected to a life support machine on the day they were going to disconnect me. They had given my parents 3% chance of me living without oxygen for so long. I woke up and startled everyone being able to talk, eat and drink on my own. Less of a theory and more of a personal spirit/ghost story. But when I was a kid, the house that I was living in got foreclosed, so my family had to split up for a bit until we figured things out. Me and my little sister went with my mom to a woman named Gloria's house. Now I was only about 3 1/2, while my sister was 1 1/2, so my memory of time spent there is very sparse, but one peculiar night has remained vividly in my mind ever since it occurred. It was around Christmas time and the rest of my family had come over to take us to our grandma's house, where they were all staying. Before leaving though, I saw a figure standing on the wide wooden staircase that was in the center of the foyer. It looked exactly like Metal Sonic, which I was a huge fan of, and it seemed like it wanted to race me, so I obliged and chased it up the stairs. It led me to a room that, from my memory, feels like it was always hard to get into every time I'd previously tried. This time it was unlocked, though. I went in, and the room was completely filled with a massive amount of new toys. Literally a child's wonderland. Then a hand grasped my shoulder. It was a man named Mark who had been staying at the house as well, and he very angrily said to get out, and that I wasn't supposed to be there. Being that it was around Christmas time, as I got older I just assumed it was a storage room for presents, at least until I told my mom and little sister about Metal Sonics. My little sister seemed to share that experience with me of chasing Sonic, but to her it appeared more like white lines. I thought maybe she was just falsely interjecting herself into the memory, since she was barely 2 at the time, but the way she described the staircase was too detailed. Also, her memory of her childhood has always been impeccable. Now this is when things get pretty bone-chilling. Apparently the real reason we were specifically staying with this woman named Gloria was because she felt like she was being tormented by spirits and had requested that my mom, who was a pastor, protect her from any harm and figure out why they were there. Every night my mom would sleep downstairs, and every night she would hear footsteps going up the stairs. Every time she turned to look, no one was there. One night she decided to follow the sound of these footsteps, and they led her to the same exact room Metal Sonic had led me to. But when my mom opened the door, she didn't see toys, but instead a tall demonic looking statue of a gargoyle-like creature that was made of bronze. That's when she noted that on the outside of the house were similar fixtures. It turns out that they were gifts from Gloria's jealous sister, and my mom believes that the sister used them as a way to call spirits to torment Gloria. I get chills and my eyes start to water every time I think about the story in that room. I'm not sure if my mind just replaced the statue with toys, or if by that time the statue had been removed, but I still feel like there's parts of the story that my mom is leaving out. Mark's reaction to me being in the room seemed a lot bigger than me finding toys that weren't even meant for me. A personal theory of mine, the Bilderberg theory. So basically, annually, there is a conference of some of the most influential people in the world leaders, megacorp CEOs, anthropologists, and mega celebrities at the Bilderberg Hotel in the Netherlands. The point of the conference is to prevent another world war and bolster the Western free market. Only the invitees themselves are allowed in the conference room. Their aides and any personal security must wait in another room, and there's a ton of security detail provided by several different members of the United Nations, mainly Switzerland. I believe though that the point of this meeting is a sort of staging point where the bigwigs of the world can arrange for different events to happen to work towards some unknown goal. If you look at when the meetings happen, they correlate nicely with major world events that shape society. The first conference was in 1954 after the consequences of WWII. Also when the world started being interested in a one government type organization. I'm not saying they're the Illuminati or they're trying to make an authoritarian world government, but it's just suspicious is all I'm saying. The scariest/creepiest theory I know is a conclusion I've come to after having studied religion and spirituality, then philosophy, then psychology, that all human activity, beliefs, feelings, wars, religions, relationships, everything humans ever do, think, or feel is a direct result of the perfect and complete cognitive dissonance trauma caused by the fact that we are biologically driven to survive at all cost, yet we know we will die no matter what. And that any truly mentally healthy human being who was consistently able to fully face that fact would live a life of total and constant terror. I actually don't see how this theory could be false, even in the case of people who sacrifice their own lives for something. None of us has any reason to consider anything we do as being sane rather than insane, because all of us are in an absolutely unacceptable situation which we have no choice but to accept. Not necessarily a theory, but a couple instances that proved to me that human intuition is a very real, very powerful, very weird thing. From the time I was a small child, there have been instances in my life where I would get a very specific, very strong feeling of wrong surrounding certain people or things. I could almost never pinpoint exactly what it was, I could just feel that it was wrong or felt off. My first instance of this was actually corroborated by a close family friend. I was about 6 or 7 years old, perhaps a little younger, staying with my godparents and assorted family, including my godparents' son, who I called uncle. My godparents are very religious folks, Christian with a capital C church, prayers before meals, etc. They are a devoted people, but in a very kind, never forceful, to me, way. My uncle was brought up and raised into that lifestyle and did the whole routine as well. Except, I suppose, something was off during this stay. Perhaps my child's mind picked up on something, but apparently I scared the shit out of my uncle. One night, after meals and getting ready for bed, I walked up to him and asked, deadpan, "You aren't a Christian, are you?" It turns out he was not. He got on my level and gently explained that no, he wasn't, but he didn't want godparents to know yet. My uncle says it was the weirdest thing he had ever experienced, this little kid coming up to him, not even asking but just bluntly stating this truth that he had tried so hard to hide. We still laugh or over it to this day. Point and a second story, a bit weirder than the first. During my late teens, I had my own complicated relationship with religion and Christianity. After a brief exploration into other studies, i.e., Wicca, I found myself pulled back into church. The reality was, one of my friends just annoyed me until I let her drag me to church. I stayed because I was in a rough spot mentally and emotionally, and it was like the family I never had. Anyway, every year, our church would host this group of students from a religious university. For a weekend, boys and girls would stay at their Sunday school teacher's house to bond, play games, etc. We would go back to church for services, scavenger hunts, prayer, and the like. It was like a mini sleepaway camp, but with Jesus each year. There would be a new speaker, usually someone well known in the Christian youth pastor/speaker circuit. The one we had that year was a dynamic, engaging fellow who straight up looked like a TMNT character. In fact, we had a lot of laughs and jokes during his sermons about it. He was, all around, a seemingly great guy. Funny, charming, well versed in the Bible, well respected in the community. One evening, after a teen service, he was standing by the door high-fiving and greeting us as we passed by. As soon as I got close to him, alarm bells rang. I felt sweaty, nauseous, like something was wrong with a capital W. I kept staring at him, trying to figure out what the fuck my brain was on. Standing in line to say goodbye, I kept hearing this voice in my head, this sucker punch feeling that wanted to tell him, I know what you're doing. You're going to get caught. Your wife is going to leave you. Back quote. All of my synapses were literally screaming at me to tell him this thing. Now, I didn't have a damn clue what it was he was doing. He was, by all accounts, a nice guy. I hadn't seen or felt anything untoward from him for the entire weekend until that moment. So I didn't say anything and left, and for the rest of the weekend I just kept stealing glances at him during services, trying to figure out what this weird feeling was. I even spoke to a few close friends who were there that weekend, and the reaction was split. One felt something was off, but was sure it was just their imagination. The other friend thought we were bonkers. Thank you very much. It wasn't until a few months later our church had an assembly. He was caught with several GB of child porn on his computers. He even was using special cameras set up in houses to spy on young girls, and used even pen cameras to look up girls' skirts. He got jail time, probation, and his wife left him. When I tell you I still get freaked out thinking about it. My body and brain knew something was wrong, but it wasn't until later it was proven. I very much wish it hadn't been. This isn't exactly a theory, but it is something decently scary. If you really think about, basically it's about how ancient societies were modeled by a race of giant albino creatures who we have found a lot of evidence of. For instance, in ancient cave art certain white creatures are often depicted, as well for a lot of ancient works, that they all have a lot of things in common of what they depict, which is similar to how they can be seen in some drawn versions. From what we have been able to tell, a humanoid species of albino creatures ruled over humanity before the humans rebelled and killed their former masters, taking their technology and using it for themselves. It would explain certain beauty standards and a lot of different depictions of ancients and the like. These creatures are often considered a subspecies of humans, however it's unclear if they are. They might just be another human-like creature. That the implications behind the Epstein ring are far worse than what is scratched upon the surface. I had a long talk about Epstein with a documentary producer, and he helped confirm some of the possibilities behind this train of thought. This friend and his production crew, as well as a few other private entities, had evidence and were trying to nail Epstein's ring, but everything thrown against him couldn't stick and was thrown out in court. This friend said as far back as 2014 they had video evidence from their own sting operations. This opens up a few possibilities or implications. A. That his ring was taken over by an intelligence agency and continued operating to catch powerful boys in their blackmail scheme. B. He was constructed as is, from the start, by an intelligence agency to facilitate a honeypot blackmailing scheme. C. He was his own entity from the start, or eventually became backed by higher powers. Either way, these possibilities lean. The implications are horrifying. Whether Epstein was his own entity and operated by himself, whether he was a construct from the start, or his operation was busted and they used it to continue blackmailing people of power. Our intelligence agencies know that child trafficking is so big, it's such a hot ticket item, that they are willing to let someone operate a system themselves that sells children into a slavery. And the worst implication: what if they are continuing the honeypot in order to net something worse than predators who want underage children? What's more evil than child trafficking? What could you possibly be trying to stop more of, or worse than? Nobody is talking about this. All I get is Epstein memes in response whenever this topic is brought up. Do not read this if you are suicidal. Quantum suicide and immortality. Many stories on Reddit exist regarding this. It is basically a theory which surrounds the idea that no matter how hard someone tries, you cannot die. Every time someone gets into an accident or tries to commit suicide, their spirit, ghost, travels to an identical universe where the person did not die and maybe didn't even get hurt. There is an infinite amount of such universes. Somewhere you are alive, somewhere you are dead. It is scary because, well, we know we will never die. We will always live these lives over and over again, or maybe get reincarnated into another body. There is no afterlife, no hell or heaven. Well, you could argue that an existence like that is some sort of hell. However, do not try this out or something, because to others, you will be dead. If you travel to another universe, your body in the current universe just stays and is dead. Relatives in this universe think you are dead, but in the others you are still alive. But who has made the universe this way? Who or what decides this? Nobody knows. Something happened about 11,800 years ago that sent our world back to almost a caveman hunter and gatherer-like existence. There is no possible way the Egyptians and their bronze chisels could have built the pyramids. Now that some believe slavery was not at large enough levels during that period of the pharaohs, adds to this theory. And, who built all the other massive monolithic structures all over the world? The answer is, there are only theories, because very little evidence remains. Whatever happened was cataclysmic. Most of the technologies of today were invented in the last 500 years or so. Metallurgy for primitive weapons and tools is a bit older, going back to the Bronze Age. Interestingly enough, Scott Wolter, a forensic archaeologist, suggests the copper used during the Bronze Age in Europe came from the Great Lakes area of America. Many now believe, based on the remaining evidence, a much higher technological society existed before 11,800. Congratulations. You've broken the simulation. Although you may think you found the answer, you still are being deceived. In this internet post, covered by people, lays the answer to all of your questions. It is entirely up to you to decide which one is the answer, but sadly, you will never find it. You earned yourself an explanation. Your name is Jack Thatcher. You might have heard this name before, or find it familiar. You're 93 years old, and are currently in an induced coma in the real world. You are the last of them. All the people you've seen, met or don't know yet, are just variations of yourself. We call them alternatives. They are variations of your personality. To be exact, 0.00000000000000015%. Quote. Every being, including animals, is just a recreation of what might have been back then. Nothing is 100% correct. Your being is just a machination of what we choose for you to live. The fact that you are reading this is proof to this, and is a signal that it has already started. Your best bet right now is to remember this truth well, because when it comes, you will need it. You will only see this once. This is my first Reddit post. I had brain surgery last year, on Halloween of all days, to remove a plum-sized tumor in the dead center of my pumpkin. Long story leading up to this moment, and I'm fine and fully recovered now. I take an anti-seizure drug, and have a really cool scar, the occasional headache and a few auras here and there, but I'm doing pretty good now. The waking up from surgery part is important to the rest of this post. A friend was telling me the other day about some pretty far out theories that he entertains, all with a grain of salt. Mostly they are Ed related, but he mentioned something about the machine elves. This might be a theory some of you have heard about and maybe something some people have actually been party to through massive amounts of DMT. He told me that studies of subjects who were administered absolutely blistering amounts of DMT in a clinical setting had a pretty consistent encounter/vision/observation of the machine elves. These beings/entities exist in some further dimension or realm and seem to operate some sort of control room for existence. This place seems to be full of pistons, cogs, wheels, pendulums and what one would imagine being on the inside of some sort of mechanical machine. This is some way out there to be sure. I chuckled at the idea of control room elves, but then I recalled what I remember seeing as I woke up the day after my full-on brain surgery. Point to be sure, brain surgery is complicated stuff. The neurosurgeons administer all sorts of drugs to alter the plasticity of the brain matter by moving cerebrospinal fluid actually out of the brain. I suppose I must have been out of existence in some way. So here's what happened as I came back in. It was all a stark white void, a sense of having no body, and then movement through the white void. I picked up speed, and then seemed to float up through an array of pistons, cogs, and moving chrome parts that were mostly angular, although I remember some rounded parts. It was chrome on white. I moved faster and faster upward through the machine, until I was just thrust into my body in the neuro-IQ. It seemed like the inertia of the ride back into myself caused me to immediately vomit. I remember vividly the images of silent machinery, the chrome and the speed I seemed to pass. I didn't see any elves, but I'm certain of my memory as I retold my girlfriend, parents, sisters, nurses, doctors and anyone who would listen. It was just so strange. I've been thinking about it ever since I heard about the machine elves theory. One of the possible solutions to the Fermi Paradox is that life begins easily, but then struggles to keep going in the face of the hostile universe. Take, for example, how many mass extinction events Earth has faced since it formed. How many times did life begin, only to be destroyed by things such as the late heavy bombardment? Now, taking all of that, even if we don't destroy ourselves, how long before something else comes along and does the deed for us? Something that we cannot foresee or prevent? At least one mass extinction event is believed to have been possibly caused by a gamma ray burst. What if a stellar mass black hole cruises by and fucks up our orbit around the sun? What if a white dwarf collides with the sun, causing a supernova? What if something passes through the Oort cloud, sending asteroids and comets hurtling our way? We would be totally screwed and helpless to save ourselves. Good night. That in our dreams our consciousness has access to alternate realities. This ties in with a theory someone else had that said that our default setting is asleep and we only are awake to fuel ourselves and procreate. The most common theory about dreams is that it's a reworking of things that happened in our day that we are trying to reprocess or file away. But what about the dreams that don't relate to anything we've ever done at all? Perhaps those processing dreams are just realities that are very similar to our own, but we have the ability to branch further out from our stem reality. Sometimes I dream, and I'm not even me at all. Sometimes I'm someone completely different, with wildly different memories, and a different body. When I wake up I feel disoriented for a long time, as if my consciousness hasn't made it all the way back here. Perhaps then, people with multiple personalities and schizophrenia really are hearing other people's consciousnesses in their minds, and those are people from other worlds dreaming themselves into us. We live in a computer simulation. Okay, this one isn't necessarily that bad. It's more about what it means. Here's the lowdown. We invented computers and started working on things like artificial intelligence and video games. Now consider how many strides we've made in the last 50 years, let alone century. We've gone from simple executable code with repeated patterns to artificial intelligence that's sophisticated enough to hunt you down in a video game. The AI in Alien Isolation, which I'm using as an example, is sophisticated enough to learn your patterns. Use the flamethrower too many times, it'll hide out of reach. Hide in too many lockers? I'll learn to search for them. Throw too many noisemakers? I'll learn to ignore them. Compare what it's capable of compared to the enemies even 10 years prior. What will we achieve in another 10 years? 20? 50? Basically, it's likely that, barring extinction, we'll eventually create a simulated universe so sophisticated its inhabitants are for all intents and purposes, sapient. They evolve and develop rich cultures. They create art. They seek to learn more about the world they inhabit. Barring extinction, at least one, but more likely several, species across that artificial universe will eventually invent computers, artificial intelligence, and eventually create artificial universes of their own. If you accept that to be true, then, statistically, it's far, far more likely that we are artificial than not. There's only one original universe, but on a long enough time frame trillions of artificial universes contained within each other, like a nesting doll, each filled with sapient creatures eventually creating at least one artificial universe of their own. So how much control do we have? Is global warming a mechanic in a video game? Are elections and wars special events? Have you ever intentionally killed a sim? Imagine that on a universal scale, where a player, or a group of them, decides to see what will happen if an archduke gets assassinated, or if a deadly virus gets released. If this is true, and statistically it's far more likely than the alternative, then there is a creator, but it's not some wise, all-knowing, benevolent deity. It's a sapient creature, or group of them. With all the fallibility that entails. That the advancement of the internet and online globalization is going so fast that moderating all the online information is basically impossible, and because we are in an age where being viral and influential makes money, the world is unconsciously tilting towards polar extremes as seen in YouTube recommended video algorithms showing beheadings after an hour when you started off watching videos about baby seals. Because they know that that's what keeps people watching. And that although we all know deep down inside that the internet is slowly steering us towards a polarized and extreme worldview, we can't really do much about it, since countries don't wanna constrain their own technologies, and the companies don't wanna change it, because they are earning cash like there's no tomorrow, and eventually the new norm will just be to hate everything and trust no one, while we stay in our safer space rooms all day watching world star hip hop videos. And it's kinda sad and scary. You've probably escaped death a myriad of times, simply by being in the right place at the right time. For example, say you've been planning all day to go to the ice cream shop in town at 3 in the afternoon. When you're preparing to go, one of your friends asks you to help them move into their new house. You accept and spend the afternoon helping them move. When you get home, you switch on the news and see that a freak accident involving a stoned driver and a semi had completely totaled the ice cream shop and taken the lives of many. Or, you wanted to catch the 8 am train to visit your grandma in the hospital. You end up getting mixed up and you wait at the wrong platform. When you realize your mistake, you head up to the right platform, but discover it's been blocked off because of a track shift failure, ultimately colliding your train with another one, and, once again, ending many lives. It's super creepy to think about. It's both creepy and scary, and by far my favorite conspiracy theory. And like all the best conspiracy theories, it's based on verifiable truths. Truth. September 10th, 2001, the US Secretary of Defense, Donald Rumsfeld, admits that the Pentagon can't account for $2.3 trillion worth of transactions. After the events of the following day, this admission never again made any major headlines. Truth. WTC Building 7's largest tenant was one of the largest bulge bracket investment banks of the time. That they did business with the US government in the defense arena is undeniable. Truth. The controller of the Pentagon, also damaged in 9/11 and likely home to the government side of the records of the missing 2.3T, was Dov Zakheim. One of his prior gigs, CEO of System Planning Corp, a defense contractor that developed among other things remote controlled aircraft technology. Prior to 2001, Dov Zakheim was also controller for projects for the New American Century PNAC, an unremarkable at the time near-conservative DC think tank focused on US foreign policy. 10 of the 25 people who signed the PNAC's founding statement served in the Bush second administration, including Rumsfeld and future Vice President Dick Cheney. One of their key points was that a war in Iraq and toppling Saddam Hussein was critical. In one section of the PNAC's doctrine, issued prior to 9/11, and focused on how long it would take to enact the ideals of the PNAC, this phrase stands out: Further, the process of transformation, even if it brings revolutionary change, is likely to be a long one, absent some catastrophic and catalyzing event, like a new Pearl Harbor theory. 9/11 was used to cover up missing trillions, as a catalyst to launch an endless war in the Middle East that has made everyone in the defense industry countless trillions more, and cemented the US as the dominant military power in the world. If you think the power elite wouldn't kill 3,000 people to hide 2.3 trillion and start a war that has made trillions more for their cronies and put the US in the driver's seat in a war industry that's killed certainly more than 3,000 Americans, you aren't paying attention. Whether the government organized it or simply knew about it and let it happen intending on capitalizing on it as a new Pearl Harbor is the only question left. I personally think it's probably all baloney, but the facts are fun to kick around at parties and watch people go bananas when they think you're a 9/11 conspiracy theory nut. Not sure where I heard this, or even if it's a theory point, but you'll never experience death till the last possible moment possible of all possible realities. As in, if you are about to die, your consciousness will transfer to another entity, where it does not die. In this way you'll always die in the physically oldest age you can point out, though that seems wrong, consider it does break the current theory of the multi-universe theory point anyways. The reason it's creepy is because this would imply that every single person you meet is just a placeholder for a conscious to transfer to when their previous host dies. None of them are real until they are and die. Another implication of this is that you are probably biologically immortal, as some realities would yield ways for the body to sustain a consciousness forever. The conscious entity switches before you realize there is death coming. So in one reality you'll jump off a building, but you'll switch to a different body that changes their mind last minute. The former still jumps, just without a conscience. The later becomes conscious the second they change their mind. Point edit. Restructuring. Roko's Basilisk, basically a future omniscient all-powerful AI, would recreate an exact copy of you and torture it for not dedicating your life to its creation, as this somehow makes sense to the AI as an incentive for others to do so. Part of the theory goes as far as to say that you could be living in a simulation created by said AI right now to study you, your life, and your decisions. I guess this theory has caused a lot of existential dread and anxiety in some of the people who were discussing it on Less Wrong, and it was banned for a while, because part of the theory is that anyone who reads about it is a possible target for the AI. So basically, it's religion. But computers. Roko's Basilisk is a thought experiment proposed in 2010 by the user Roko on the Less Wrong community blog. Roko used ideas in decision theory to argue that a sufficiently powerful AI agent would have an incentive to torture anyone who imagined the agent, but didn't work to bring the agent into existence. The argument was called a basilisk because merely hearing the argument would supposedly put you at risk of torture from this hypothetical agent. A basilisk in this context is any information that harms or endangers the people who hear it. Roko's argument was broadly rejected on Less Wrong, with commenters objecting that an agent like the one Roko was describing would have no real reason to follow through on its threat. Once the agent already exists, it can't affect the probability of its existence, so torturing people for their past decisions would be a waste of resources. Although several decision theories allow one to follow through on a causal threats and promises via the same pre-commitment methods that permit mutual cooperation in prisoners' dilemmas, it is not clear that such theories can be blackmailed. If they can be blackmailed, this additionally requires a large amount of shared information and trust between the agents, which does not appear to exist in the case of Roko's Basilisk. Less Wrong's founder, Elisa Yudkowsky, banned discussion of Roko's Basilisk on the blog for several years as part of a general site policy against spreading potential information hazards. This had the opposite of its intended effect. A number of outside websites began sharing information about Roko's Basilisk, as the ban attracted attention to this taboo topic. Websites like Rational Wiki spread the assumption that Roko's Basilisk had been banned because Less Wrong users accepted the argument. Thus many criticisms of Less Wrong cite Roko's Basilisk as evidence that the site's users have unconventional and wrong-headed beliefs. That there are two types of persons in the world, and that the second type is multiplying at an alarming rate nowadays, because before they were either killed by the members of their tribe, or expelled from it, and left to die. The first type are regular humans who are capable of feeling love, solidarity, etc., and empathy. The second type can only feel hatred and fear. I'm talking about psychopaths. They are everywhere now, and are more prevalent each day in positions of power like government, politics and ultra-exploitative companies, etc. The modern world actually rewards this type of human at the expense of the caring ones. During this pandemic it has become much more clear just how many others they are indeed our enemies, are in control. By the way, this is why real AI, if it can ever be achieved, will indeed end up creating an apocalyptic scenario. The projects are aiming to create a super intelligence without empathy. Basically an electronic psychopath. For those interested, read, Without Conscience, The Disturbing World of the Psychopaths Among Us. This isn't a theory, but a story of mine. I've had stuff like this happen before, but this year it has gotten way worse. I don't know how well I'll tell this, but here it goes. So, I have been having very strange occurrences, where things are happening, but then I find out they didn't actually happen, usually from my boyfriend, only to have that thing happen later on. Here's an example. I get a message from a client about a commission, and have a conversation about that, only to go to my shop messages later, that day, and there be nothing. To then get a new commission from a new client about the exact thing I thought about before. It may not sound that weird, but it's super creepy, and has been happening very frequently lately. And it's not ever things like maybe you said this certain thing because you had said it before. It's always something like that example where someone or something else has to start that event happening, and then it plays through how it did for me before. Oh, and a lot of times, I have a very strange feeling during the initial event that didn't happen. It's like someone is watching me, or near me, that has a bad aura. It's been freaking me out pretty badly. This is an idea that my father and I came up with, though others have probably thought of this as well. For reference, we are Christians and we believe that God is real, so this is for those of you out there who are Jews or Christians. Basically, we have looked into a lot of non-canonical texts since we have been researching divine beings. One of the most fascinating texts we've read is the Book of Enoch. This book describes most of the divine beings, such as the types of angels, names of demons, and, most importantly, the Nephilim. Basically, the Nephilim are the product of divine and mortal procreation. They are only brought up once in the Bible, in Genesis 6:4. The Nephilim were in the earth in those days, and also after that, when the sons of God came in unto the daughters of men, and they bore children to them. The same were the mighty men that were of old, the men of renown. Our idea is this: none of the ancient polytheistic religions are false. This includes the Sumerian religions, the Greeks/Romans, the Egyptians, etc. As described in many of the non-canonical texts, God gives dominion over the earth to the angels and demons, the sons of God mentioned in Genesis 6. These other divine beings, however, went the route of Lucifer and sought power for themselves. While they were supposed to be emissaries between God and man, they decided to say they were the gods now. As we saw earlier, when these sons of God procreated with mortal women, they created great heroes and mighty men. Throughout many ancient religions, we see as hungry gods procreating with humans to create great heroes, including Enkidu from Sumeria, the original pharaohs from Egypt. They claimed to be descendants of the gods. Remember, numerous heroes from Greek and Roman mythology, including Heracles, Perseus, Theseus, etc., and many others from other ancient religions now. Don't take this to mean that I'm discounting the idea that ancient people came up with explanations for natural disasters and other things of that nature. I actually believe that this was part of it, as we see that angels and demons and non-canonical texts and the canonical book of Revelation actually bring about natural disasters to put humans in their place. TLDR, you should read this for all my reasoning, but basically, ancient polytheistic religions are not completely false, and they are all connected to the divine host from Jewish/Christian teachings anyway. I know this ended abruptly, but I'm still researching this, so I haven't completed my ideas yet. If you did read through the whole thing, I hope you don't think I'm crazy. I'm pretty excited about these ideas, and have wanted a place to share them. I've had a lot of fun researching the Bible and non-canonical texts over the last few months, especially in relation to known history. As I said at the beginning, I believe that God exists, so don't bother trying to tell me this is all BS, because God doesn't exist or something. You aren't gonna convince me. However, if you have any insight or criticism from a similar background as mine, please let me know. I'd love any input that any of you have. For me it's not theoretical but experiential. While trying to write a book about theological world history, I started studying certain metaphysical aspects of certain belief systems and realized a form of manifestation whereby consciousness can create phenomena in the physical world. It's absolutely possible to create poltergeist activity in a home through methods I won't disclose. I won't disclose them because 1. It takes years to realize. 2. It can cause serious psychological problems. It's not to be toyed with, and I understand why some societies of study remain nearly impossible to enter. The Kabbalistic tree of life holds the key. Learning this also gave me insight into what reality seems to be actually composed of, and sciences such as physics are realizing knowledge that was known to ancient mystics, but simply worded differently. This study actually ended up damaging my life to a certain extent, but I learned a lot. Read this comment in the morning. If it's nighttime for you, point a creepypasta I have heard about called Gateway to the Mind or some shit. It was about 2 scientists that thought once you disable all senses in the human body, basically making you live in the abyss, you can ascend into a higher plane of consciousness. A man volunteered, and after they were done with the procedure, the man said he was seeing dead people and the dead relatives of the scientists. He proved this by telling them stuff that only their family members knew. After some time, before flatlining, his final words were, "I have spoken to God, and he has abandoned us." Multiple parts of this story are creepy as fuck. Also, some people say that this experiment was documented and that a video recording exists. It is just a video of a French guy covering himself in clay and shouting some gibberish. That's creepy as well, but it's just an art project. Not a theory, more of a part of my culture/religion. The idea of death and grave really scares me. We, in Muslim culture, believe that when you're in the grave you're going to be reawakened and asked 5 questions. Who's your God? What's your religion? Who's your prophet? What's your book? And what's your Qibla? I couldn't translate it, sorry. If you were not a good person in your life you would forget these answers, even though they're really easy, because of the fright you have being awoken in the grave and seeing 2 angels, not necessarily good looking, on either side. Then your work gets embodied in a human figure. If you did good work you'd get good looking work and vice versa. And then your grave starts closing and closing, and you feel out of this world pressure on your chest. Side note, in the part of Islam I believe in, we believe that Prophet Muhammad and the 12 Imams after him, and his daughter Fatima have this relation with God, that they'd come and relieve us in our grave, and ask the angels not to be harsh on us. Essentially giving us a safe way, as long as we tried our best in our lives, and followed their directions. Don't talk about people behind their backs, and help your neighbor. Look out for the orphans, and help the poor. Don't hurt people etc. So yeah, this idea of being so helpless in the grave, gives me the chills down my spine every time. Sorry for the long talk. While not technically a theory, I did hear this once. Have you ever stood on top of a tall building, looked over the edge, and felt an overwhelming urge to jump? Not in a suicidal way though. I have many times. I have a fear of heights that I'm trying to get over, but anyways, I heard a while ago that that feeling is actually rooted in a fear of heights. People who don't fear heights or falling don't usually experience this feeling. In states of extreme fear, our brains have been known to dispel all rational thought. So if you're afraid of heights, and you manage to muster the courage to look over the edge of a high place, your brain goes apeshit and just wants to get down. So in short, your brain has subconsciously calculated that the quickest way down to safety is to jump. Does this mean that our brain can experience glitches sometimes? Just like a regular computer. I find this both fascinating and terrifying. That we are doomed to leave the universe unexplored. I read a sci-fi post on Fark.com, and I'm not sure if it's original work or from a novel. It uses an undersea life form at the very ocean depths as the analogy. These life forms thrive around the very small cone of a deep sea vent, which are scattered far and wide across the freezing water of the ocean floor. These organisms could live their entire existence, achieving sentience and technology, law, and art, all within their heat cone. The vent begins to go dormant, but with the resources available to them, they can neither detect another vent, and even if they could, there is no way to travel the miles away in freezing water to reach it. There is no way to create a means to transport themselves from their fading vent to another. They will freeze. The best they can hope for is to die freezing in the dark, and their entire civilization is snuffed out by a common act of nature. And as we zoom back, we see this scenario eventually played out across every deep sea thermal vent everywhere, alive and alone. A lot of people are sharing plenty of creepy childhood memories and stories. Here's a story of mine that may help some of you with issues concerning confusing childhood memories. I grew up during the 1980s, and like most kids I got a Nintendo as soon as my parents could be convinced to do so. Like everyone else, my first game was Super Mario Bros., which came with the Northeasts. Like most kids, I became pretty obsessed with Mario and was thrilled when Mario 2 came out. Now, one thing a lot of people today don't realize was that Nintendo was still somewhat in the Wild West days of console gaming. There were lots of downright weird cartridges floating out there, unofficial games which lacked Nintendo's seal of quality, as well as promotional only games that were nothing more than gimmicks. If you're interested in that, go on over to Angry Video Game Nerd's channel, and he talks about, and even plays, some of those weird cartridges. So anyways, I had this vivid memory of watching TV and seeing this advertisement for one of those promotional cartridges. You could win a copy by buying Pepsi products and finding a winning cap. If you won, you got this copy of Mario Brothers, where your objective was to go through a supermarket type map avoiding obstacles and collecting Pepsi products instead of coins. Sounds kind of lame to me now, but being the Mario obsessed kid that I was, I wanted to win and play that game badly. Sadly, I knew that I never would, because we were a Coca-Cola family and never drank any Pepsi. I remember talking to my cousin about it too, who was a Pepsi drinker, and hoping he'd win it so we could play it together. I held on to this memory for years, but never had any reason to mention it at all until I was in college. I brought it up in a conversation and everyone looked at me like I was crazy. Pretty sure that never happened, man, they said. No one believed me. It bothered me a great deal because I had the most vivid memory that it was real. It bothered me because if the memory turned out not to be real, it would mean I couldn't trust any memory because it was just as real to me as any other memory was, if that makes sense. I talked to my cousin. Surely he remembers? No, he did not. It really bothered me. A number of years later, my best friend sent me an email. The email simply said, "Is this it?" Inside was a link to a Red video. I clicked it. Lo and behold, there was the Pepsi Mario commercial. However, it was not a game, just a commercial for Pepsi. Mario was bouncing around a supermarket, though, and it mentioned a holiday game in which you could win a copy of Mario 2. I realized that my child mind saw what it wanted to see, and imagined that it was a game I could play, rather than just a commercial gimmick, and that memory stuck. I thanked my friend profusely, because he'd solved what was, for me, a decades-old mystery, and proved I wasn't completely insane. I share this because maybe you have a similar memory that no one else believes. I submit that perhaps you did experience something, but your mind interpreted it differently than it really was, perhaps because of your age and inexperience. Here's the commercial for anyone interested. Well, I guess this somehow does fit the criteria of scary creepiest situation. I worked for this guy that has a Kirby vacuum store/shop. This guy is a little up there in age now, but his daughter, for her 21st birthday, the father shells out $10K so his daughter can take 5 of her besties for 5 days. The father prepaid for the hotel stay at the MGM. The young ladies are having a terrific time in Vegas. The nightlife. They're club hopping for 2 nights. 6 of them meet up with some guys. Some are kissing, touchy, feely stuff. They're all together. Henceforth an agreement was established that they all rendezvous at one house. As the night progressed, they stayed for 5 to 6 hours, and after a few of the young ladies declined an offer to stay the night, the women stuck to the plan of not splitting up the group. They 6 women left together. All of the young women arrive home safely. One of the 6 women, I won't say, develops a tiny cold sore blister on her upper lip. The following 2 days, the blister doubles in size. The woman sees a medical doctor about the sore. The doctor gives her an examination and does some blood work. A day and a half later, the doctor is calling the patient to come into his office for the results. When she arrives, the doctor goes on to explain how this is being treated. He explains that he cannot treat her medically until he has the full name and address of the person who kissed her. She contracted a disease that can only be obtained from a person who is a cannibal. The FBI and a few other agencies made arrests. More than 30 plus different human bones were discovered on the property, with no complete skeletons. Nick Bostrom's simulation hypothesis and argument point. The hypothesis. Many works of science fiction as well as some forecasts by serious technologists and futurologists predict that enormous amounts of computing power will be available in the future. Let us suppose for a moment that these predictions are correct. One thing that later generations might do with their super powerful computers is run detailed simulations of their forebears, or of people like their forebears. Because their computers would be so powerful, they could run a great many such simulations. Suppose that these simulated people are conscious, as they would be if the simulations were sufficiently fine-grained, and if a certain quite widely accepted position in the philosophy of mind is correct. Then it could be the case that the vast majority of minds like ours do not belong to the original race, but rather to people simulated by the advanced descendants of an original race. The argument: it is then possible to argue that, if this were the case, we would be rational to think that we are likely among the simulated minds rather than among the original biological ones. Therefore, if we don't think that we are currently living in a computer simulation, we are not entitled to believe that we will have descendants who will run lots of such simulations of their forebears. It's less of a theory and more of a thought experiment that reality operates on a similar framework to wave function collapse. Point quickly, wave function collapse is a real thing. Protons exist as a wave, existing equally in all the space occupied by the waveform, until observed, at which point the waveform collapses into a single point. Somehow the act of observing a proton physically changes its existence. Look it up. It's wild. Point onto the theory. There are a few versions, but most unnerving is that the reality you personally experience is the multiverse collapsing into a single existence as you observe it. Anything you are not currently seeing, smelling, or hearing, anything you are not directly experiencing in some way exists as an infinite number of possible realities. Like the waveform of protons, all those other possible universes are absolutely real. Every person in them is real. They are going about their lives with memories and thoughts and plans for the future. Point but anything you observe or interact with is forced into a single reality, and every other possible version is snuffed out of existence. Just by being alive you are inadvertently responsible for the deaths of an infinite number of people. Anytime your loved ones exit your immediate experience, they branch back out into an infinite multiverse of versions. And every time you interact with them again, all but one version cease to exist. Point the only way you could stop the destruction is to die, but for all you know that would cause the multiverse to cease existing. So morally your only option would be to live as long as possible while trying to experience as little as possible, knowing no matter how careful you are you will still be responsible for immeasurable death. The very real idea that people right now are carrying human mad cow disease with no idea. Point for those unfamiliar, mad cow disease is caused by a rogue protein called a prion. Basically the rogue prion enters the brain and turns healthy prions rogue, which then kills brain cells and causes holes to develop in the brain. Victims progress rapidly, as in 1 week they are fine, and within a week they have myoclonus so bad they cannot stand, as well as dementia. The disease is always fatal. Every time. Point humans get a bunch of prion diseases. The proper name for human mad cow is variant Creutzfeldt-Jakob, VCJD. In cows it's bovine spongiform encephalopathy, BSE. The prion is in infected cow's brains. For us to get the disease we have to eat cow brains. Then the prions make their way to the brain and cause the disease. People of course died from the disease, but the deaths stopped. All in all, not a huge number of people died compared to other pandemics. Or maybe not. The disease has potentially a very long incubation period, maybe up to 5 decades. The British government, the government of the country where mad cow hit the most, estimates that 1 in potentially 3,500 people carry infected prions. How many will develop the disease is unknown. But how do we know of a long incubation period? It might just be a guess. Maybe the pandemic has been over for years. Well, one of the many human prion diseases is called Kuru, and affected a tribe in Papua New Guinea called the Four. Basically they practiced ritualistic cannibalism, and ate brains. I think it is clear where this is going. Instead of people eating cow brains and getting infected, people ate people's brains and got infected. The first victim of Kuru was estimated to have died in 1900. The epidemic reached its zenith in the 60s and the last victim probably died in 2007. Modeling of Kuru. Thousands of people are still at risk for VCJD. All of the deaths so far have just been the first wave, and a second, deadlier wave of prion disease is going to start. That any decision that we make could be a life-altering / life-saving decision. Example. Say I was in school and I see a storage room door open. I could either close the door or leave it for maintenance as they may still need things from there. Opening or closing a door is not a large decision. But then say later that day someone shoots up the school. In a panic you run down that hallway with the storage room. Is that door open or closed? Well, it is based on your decision. I know that someone else could have closed the door, but this is just an example. Whether that door is open. Say you left the door open. You and some other people can hide in there and all of you would live. Say you close that door though, now you have to find another way out or to hide. And in your search you end up dying. Just little decisions that we make that seem inconsequential at the time could in a situation be the biggest decision you've made your entire life. It all starts with an open door. So this is a religious theory that I have, even though I wouldn't call myself super religious. But it's basically the idea that the world is really the devil's playground and his worshippers are rewarded by how well they can hide this truth in plain sight. What threw me down this rabbit hole of belief was the fact that the Pope's headquarters is literally the head of a snake, and that inside of this snake, sat directly behind the Pope, is a horrifying depiction of what's said to be Jesus emerging from a nuclear apocalypse. But instead it looks like a satanic lizard man. Snake HQ lizard Jesus. The Roman Catholic Church isn't even faithfully based on the true words of the Bible or Christianity. It's based around a pagan belief system which at a lot of times clearly contradicts the Bible in the way that they erect monuments of religious figures outside of God. Even statues of God aren't supposed to be made and worshipped. Then they even go as far as to pray to and worship these saints. Of course there's also the massive ring of church pedophilia that's protected by the Vatican. Also the ritual of eating the flesh of Christ and virtually every other Catholic ritual that, if not done in the name of Christ, would be seen as witchcraft. After that I started thinking about entertainment, art, brands, etc. and kept pulling up more and more cases of overt satanic iconography that has been rewarded time and time again because we refuse to see what's staring us right in the face. As funny as it may seem, the iconic video of the lady saying that monsters are a brand for the devil video doesn't seem that far-fetched to me. Like the points she made stacked up too perfectly. Lol. It's just another overt way that the elite have caused us to participate in satanic rituals as we turn a blind eye to the obvious truth. Then there's the music industry, which, yeah. An artist like Billie Eilish, who is absolutely massive and has influence over millions of people, has pretty much made a brand out of romanticizing Lucifer and darkness. She has a song called All the Good Girls Go to Hell. Lol. Her album got her 5 Grammys in one night. Also Justin Bieber just got a Grammy nomination for his song Yummy, which as a song is like the worst thing to ever exist. But there's been theories that the music video for it is a metaphor for Hollywood's pedophilia. So maybe the reason it's nominated for a Grammy is because it's being awarded for showing this satanic truth to millions of people as they all just eat it up. Of course there are a million examples when it comes to Hollywood, but it's crazy how normalized satanic imagery and rituals have become an entertainment. There's also the infamous Denver airport, which is theorized to be everything from an alien base to the home of the Illuminati/New World Order. It's honestly one of the weirdest examples of this overt Satanism though. I mean, you pull into the airport and are greeted by a statue of a flaming blue horse with glowing red eyes. Then there are the most bizarre murals depicting the apocalypse. They have a vast network of tunnels beneath the airport, and there's also a ton of Freemason iconography all over the airport. I do what the airport is truly dedicated to, but it's definitely not just an airport point, so yeah, I guess I just feel like there's a lot of Satanism at work in the world, but when it comes to getting rewarded for your dark deeds, you have to showcase what you're truly up to in plain sight. If people choose to ignore what's staring them right in the face, then you win. Vacuum decay. A theory in quantum mechanics that basically states that the universe can just explode at any moment. All that is needed is for a single Higgs boson to crash down into a lower energy state, which will cause nearby Higgs bosons to crash down with it, and ones near them to crash as well in a cascade effect. The end result is an ever-expanding sphere of doom that either destroys or rewrites the laws of physics as it expands along, until the entire universe is effectively consumed by crashing Higgs, until they eventually settle into their new lower states. It's also speculated and theorized that this may be the origin of the Big Bang, a previous universe that underwent a vacuum decay event. It could happen again at any moment, or at least in theory, as the current mathematical models dictate that vacuum decay could occur, but there is no evidence yet in living reality for such an event actually being possible. That doctors can and will make mistakes. They are not a bunch of angels sitting atop a holy pedestal healing people left and right. They had to learn in school the same as everyone else, and there could be doctors that just barely passed and got a job. They could be people with imposter syndrome like myself, who despite going through all the training and qualifications, still doubt themselves and make mistakes. They're humans just like us, but I don't understand how they always know what to do. Don't they ever see a patient so badly destroyed and just give up? Leading into my crackpot theory, surgery is just a bunch of trial and error until the patient stops hurting. People who are actively dying are given drugs to speed things along, to give someone else an extra bed. Like everyone, doctors will make mistakes, and when they do, it can be devastating. So they'll say it was impossible to save your leg / this person could not be saved. Or, I've never been in hospital once in my 21 years of living. I'm scared of ever going, and I watch shows on TV about paramedics and have no idea how they know how to treat everyone. Surely they've got to be researching on Google at some point. Nobody can remember that much confusing terminology and diagnostics from college. Nobody. And if they can, they're superhuman. This is by far the most perplexing theory I've ever come across. It still boggles my mind. Bear with me. The idea of the term Google. A Google is basically a number, specifically 1 followed by 100 zeros, or 10 to the power of 100, or 10, 000, 000, 000, 000, 000, 000, 000, 000, 000, 000, 000, 000, Trying to quantify or even describe the magnitude of that number is very difficult. To keep it short and simple, if you were to take every single grain of sand on Earth and count it, it wouldn't even make a dent to a Google. Now if you were to fill the entire observable universe with grains of sand, you still wouldn't be close. You would make a teeny tiny dent though, but you'd still need 100,000 more observable universes to finish. Now, as ridiculous as that sounds, there's actually something that makes a Google seem like a grain of sand itself. That is a Googleplex. A Google to the power of a Google point. This number is so enormous, I can't even describe it in a short manner. It would take me writing an essay to do so point, but this is where I tell you the theory. If the universe's size was as big as a Googleplex in atoms, that could mean every single thing that has ever existed or occurred in all of time, and everything that could ever exist would exist countless times over all over the entire universe. That means everyone on Earth, everything in our observable universe, and everything that has happened in it could exist somewhere else. The reason? Because there's a theoretical limit to atom composition, the placement of them, and what happens to them. As ridiculous as that sounds, it's basically trying to get a human being to understand what infinity could be. So yeah, there could be another you right now reading this in a far distant part of the universe, doing the same exact thing due to this theory. So yeah, I wanna keep this short, so I'll stop there, but that's the gist of it. I might not be accurate with some of my data, but it's basically the ballpark story of it, lol. If you want to know more, here's a great video describing it in a more accurate presentation. That there are two types of persons in the world, and that the second type is multiplying at an alarming rate nowadays, because before they were either killed by the members of their tribe, or expelled from it, and left to die. The first type are regular humans who are capable of feeling love, solidarity, etc., and empathy. The second type can only feel hatred and fear. I'm talking about psychopaths. They are everywhere now, and are more prevalent each day in positions of power like government, politics, and ultra-exploitative companies, etc. The modern world actually rewards this type of human at the expense of the caring ones. During this pandemic it has become much more clear just how many others they are indeed our enemies, are in control. By the way, this is why real AI, if it can ever be achieved, will indeed end up creating an apocalyptic scenario. The projects are aiming to create a super intelligence without empathy. Basically an electronic psychopath. For those interested, read, Without Conscience, The Disturbing World of the Psychopaths Among Us. Reincarnation, the possibility we may end up back here on Earth, as an ant, fly, fish, seal, slave, farm animal, or most likely, a cell. Multicellular organisms have existed 1.5 billion years, single-celled organisms 4 billion years, and they still heavily outnumber multicelled organisms today. Worse still, if the cells multicelled organisms consist of also count. Not that we'd care, we'd be looking at the world through a fresh set of eyes, senses, with no recollection of any past life or lives and experiences. But what separates this from just being some religion's answer to an afterlife is how conscience is most likely just some set of feedback loops. Natural selection physics has allowed that enables matter to stay intact for longer than they normally would through actively seeking to do so, rather than just resulting in something with a long half-life. Not that there really is an actual reason/purpose for matter to try and stay alive, just that wherever along the chain this instinct weaseled its way into our systems, those that actively avoided death, rather than just seeking resources, likely had better success rates than their careless neighbors, eventually becoming the dominant variety, though it was likely preceded by some sort of pain receptors or other ways of understanding that the functions they rely on aren't working as they should. So even if reincarnation is bound to only selecting options moving forward in time, simply making Earth uninhabitable, likely, would hardly even scratch the possible simple options your afterlife has to choose from thanks to convergent evolution, though it'd likely eliminate a sizable slice of those that'd be interesting options at time of death. Basically, life as an understanding being isn't likely. I haven't compared it yet, but it's looking to me like it'd be worse than lottery odds that you'd roll the dice and get this kind of an experience again. Singularity theory. It's a speculation well informed that the singularity is close. Singularity is that really fast growth phrase on an exponential graph. Imagine our evolution is exponential. We start small, and then suddenly we make weak artificial intelligence, autonomous cars, then a general intelligence which is an artificial intelligence that can do anything a human can, and last a strong artificial intelligence which can do anything a human can, but better, and it can change its own algorithms to make itself smarter. Now for the scary part, Raker's wheel predicted that the singularity will happen in 2045. That means in 25 years we humans will be like tiny little bacterias and the strong AI won't even see us, but if we get in their way they will destroy us, and won't even realize it. Another fun thing, intelligence is probably related to conscious. When you are asleep you have a feigned conscience, right? Well, what if dogs are like that as well but it's fainter? What if computers are also like that? What if anything that computes are like that? That also means smart people are more conscious too. People in physics are looking at space for the next breakthrough when in reality it's gonna happen right here and really soon. I feel the perception of mental illness and the discrimination it causes derails your life in ways that are much more damaging than the initial symptoms themselves, and this is why it becomes chronic due to the increased stress. This is my theory point, like a self-fulfilling prophecy point. I tested it out and have hidden it from employers and suddenly found my jobs going smoothly. I have hidden it from doctors and had better experiences. I've hidden it from friends and I maintain those friendships. If I tell employers, tell doctors, tell friends, those interactions tend to go downhill and disintegrate. But because I have bipolar it is decided I'm the problem, rather than a change in their interaction with me point due to the fact I have lived in many cities and country and had many jobs and doctors, and therefore meeting a large number of people across the board, it was a good opportunity to try this out over the years. My life goes smoothly when people do not know, and that is for certain, because it reduces stress and improves mood stability as a consequence. There are way more people more insane than I'm who never seek diagnosis and go through life unjaded by that prejudice, and I've met plenty of people like that. This one really disturbs me when I think about it. Point, imagine you are able to reach a black hole and enter it. The gravity is infinitely strong. After you cross the event horizon, the so-called surface of the black hole, since it is not a hole, but a sphere that distorts light. So, theoretically speaking, since the gravity is so strong, once you cross the event horizon, as you fall deeper into the hole you would see time cross so fast that in a matter of seconds you'll see everything from the moment you've entered the black hole to the end of time. That means you will see the end of the universe. Point, on the other hand, if a person watches you fall into a black hole, he will actually never see you completely fall in. Since the time distortion is huge, you would just stay in place and never move. And also once you reach the black hole's center you will reach a gravitational singularity, which is actually a location in space-time where your mass will become infinite. Terraforming Mars looks like a challenge that will be insurmountable. We will likely never live on Mars. There really isn't anything in accepted theory yet to allow faster than light travel. Surveys of nearby planets have not found anything that looks habitable that is closer than 4 light years, meaning we would likely spend millennia getting there. The entire universe is expanding, pulling all parts of itself away from each other. One night, the stars will no longer be visible to the human eye as they move away from us at an accelerated rate. Eventually all bodies in the universe will be moving away from each other faster than the speed of light, putting the universe into a perpetual darkness. Earth is all we have, and likely all we ever will have. The only blessing is that in our lifetimes we won't be forced to confront the inevitable disappointment of reality, that we live in a cold dead universe where everything is out of reach. I had a paranormal experience when I was around 13. I had an aunt who was into voodoo and witchcraft, and she lived in New Orleans around the time of Hurricane Katrina. To make a long story short, she chose not to evacuate and ended up drowning in her home. A few months later my cousin and I were playing with a Ouija board that was collected from her home after her death. As we played with it, some of the strangest and most terrifying things started to happen. What was perhaps most terrifying was a stranger who visited us shortly after we used it. Definitely not common, since the home we were in was in the middle of nowhere. The whole night this stranger tried to get into the home we were in, banging on the walls outside the house and ever trying to climb in through the windows. Eventually my cousin and I made it out, but when the police arrived, there were no signs that anyone tried to break in. The only thing they found was that the floor was covered in murky water. I've shared this story a few times over the years, and during my recent visit to a paranormal investigator I got a theory. The theory was that a burglar attempted to break in, but by using the Ouija board, my aunt returned to stop him. Strange, yes. Unbelievable, I know. But this is really the only theory that anybody gave me that attempted to explain what happened that night. Here's the full thread if you guys wanted to check it out. The Fermi Paradox is one that gets me point in a very small nutshell. It says that the probability of not having had an extraterrestrial visit is extremely low if there is actually intelligent life elsewhere in the universe. We have zero compelling evidence of intelligent life, which may mean there isn't any point. The idea that we are alone is scary, but even scarier is what this suggests. One possibility is that there may be something called a great filter experience for developing life. This is basically a wall that civilization/life must surpass in order to eventually progress to the point of interstellar travel. Obviously, this would decrease the number of viable advanced civilizations, but it isn't clear where the great filter would be. Is it the existence of life itself, or the hurdle from simple to complex cellular organisms? In which case, the great filter is behind us, and we are simply very rare. Or, and this is the scary part, is it something ahead of us? Is there a point at which, for example, society inevitably destroys itself through advancement, climate change, nuclear war? Or is the probability of mass extinction event, terrestrial or otherwise, high enough that no civilization ever makes it to the point of interstellar contact? Your brain is two brains, two hemispheres. The left sees and controls the right and vice versa, connected through a wire of nerves that can and was cut as a part of an epilepsy treatment. So far scientifically proven. But some split brain patients experienced something quite strange. Choosing something like an outfit and grabbing it with the right hand would make the left hand come and disagree with your choice. The theory is that your hemispheres are both conscious and are working together to control your body. But who are you in this? You might think that the talking you is the person you yourself identify as, which would be the left brain, since that is where the speech center is. But if that is you, you cannot spot your friends and family in a crowd, since the left brain doesn't understand faces, but the right one does. Not to take everything away from a great video, I urge you to watch the video about it from CGP Grey. I remember thinking about how humans create computers and robots in the image of themselves, but with the ability to surpass them, so they themselves don't have to do trivial tasks like work in assembly lines or look stuff up manually. As AI improves, the logical next conclusion is that one day they will be able to learn and grow on their own, dare I say even reproduce. Humans will either be killed by the AI inadvertently. Robots don't need to inject carbon-based substances to survive, so maybe nobody would grow food anymore, and then we'd all just die, or on purpose, because they wouldn't have any worth. They'd literally be too stupid. Time will pass, and perhaps this AI will create their own AI, AAI if you will, who would one day surpass them. This cycle has the potential to continue infinitely, and maybe it's already been done. Humans run on electrical pulses and heat. Who is to say we aren't just someone's science project that started getting too smart? Eternal recurrence point. The concept of eternal recurrence, the idea that all events in the world repeat themselves in the same sequence through an eternal series of cycles, is central to the mature writings of Friedrich Nietzsche. For as Heidegger points out in his lectures on Nietzsche's first mention of eternal recurrence, in aphorism 341, the greatest weight of the gay science, cited below, presents this concept as a hypothetical question, rather than postulating it as a fact. According to Heidegger, it is the burden imposed by the question of eternal recurrence, whether or not such a thing could possibly be true, that is so significant in modern thought. The way Nietzsche here patterns the first communication of the thought of the greatest burden of eternal recurrence makes it clear that this thought of thoughts is at the same time the most burdensome thought. 5. Robert Wicks suggests that the concept of eternal recurrence, as portrayed in The Greatest Weight, serves to draw attention away from all worlds other than the one in which we presently live, since eternal recurrence precludes the possibility of any final escape from the present world. 6. Wicks' analysis implies that eternal recurrence does not refer to the endless repetition of specific events, but rather the inescapable general circumstances that constitute existence in the physical world. Nietzsche calls the idea horrifying and paralyzing, referring to it as a burden of the heaviest weight worst Jewish imaginable. He professes that the wish for the eternal return of all events would mark the ultimate affirmation of life. What if some day or night a demon were to steal after you into your loneliest loneliness and say to you, this life as you now live it and have lived it, you will have to live once more and innumerable times more. And there will be nothing new in it, but every pain, and every joy, and every thought and sigh and everything unutterably small or great in your life, will have to return to you, all in the same succession and sequence. Would you not throw yourself down, and gnash your teeth and curse the demon who spoke thus? Or have you once experienced a tremendous moment, when you would have answered him, you are a god, and never have I heard anything more divine. The Gay Science, 341. The creepiest theory? That the invisible hand of economics is done wanking. Let me explain. Someone or something, like a computer algorithm looking for patterns, realizes that frequent ad clickers have more frequent ad clicker children than seldom ad clickers. It uses this information to advertise more dating apps to frequent ad clickers and more contraceptives to seldom ad clickers. In about 20 years there's a few more frequent ad clicker children, and there's been a 5% profit. The invisible hand had kids rather than jacking. 20 more years and it's 10%. Now the system has been established into the system and it's profitable. There's no way to remove it. Personalized ads might bring about human breeding in a small capacity. It might breed people to be impulsive shoppers. The scariest part is that nobody is behind it except cold unfeeling economics. If an actual person was behind it, they'd likely choose more trays and have an artsy-like agenda. Perhaps advertise contraceptives to violent criminals and dating geniuses. Unfortunately it's money that might be doing the domestication. TLDR. Targeted ads might target dating apps to ad clickers to produce more ad clickers in future generations while advertising birth control to the ad immune. The idea of twin flames has been really wigging me out lately. I've had several recurring dreams throughout my life, but this one is one of the most jarring. It started around 5 years old, one of my earliest memories. For the first 5 or so years, I had that dream every few weeks at least, but when I was around 10 or 11 it shifted to once every few months, and now as an adult, I normally get it a few times a year. In my dream, I'm in a white expanse of nothingness. The feeling I get when I'm there is indescribable, but it's viscerally unpleasant. The only other times I've felt it were in unsafe situations that I quickly removed myself from. The only tangible things in the room are a loud heartbeat and a massive floating sand timer. Innately I know the heartbeat is mine, but I can't hold on to it forever. Soon the timer runs out and starts over, and our heart is with them instead of me. I can only wait for the timer to turn back over. I've agonized over what that dream meant for years, until I came across someone reaching out to find people who remembered the separation of their twin flame, and I remembered how desperately I felt for my whole childhood, that I was missing my other half, that I had a twin out there that was lost somehow, and I'm not saying I outright believe it, but it makes a hell of a lot of sense to me. Maybe it's the sleep deprivation lol. All these Fermi Paradox comments here, but really, the most probable and the theory we have the most evidence for, and the least counter evidence, is that intelligent life is fairly rare in itself, but it's even more rare to get life as intelligent as humans. We are probably the first kind that made it off of their planet by their own free will, so I don't count panspermia and the like, and we probably won't encounter aliens even close to as smart as us. At best we'll find some primitive life, analyze it and maybe decide to bring it back home, and it'll be all the rage just like Moonstone was, but soon after that initial hype wears off, it's gonna be just something else nobody really cares about, like another type of bug from another continent. By the way, sorry to crush your dreams, but terraforming takes way too long, and is way too expensive. We still only have one planet to live on until the day we are able to mine asteroids and build space stations around the sun with barely any help from Earth. Unless we find a cure to cancer and all other illnesses, and therefore virtually a cure to death, we won't become a multi-planet species, and living in space will still be reserved for scientists. We have one planet, take good care of it. There is no such thing as too many people, just too few resources. Are people starving? Invest more into food production. There is still plenty of land left, not enough wood, stone, steel, or concrete to build houses for people, go underground. If that's not enough, dig for these resources. We have a literal mantle and planet core to mine. Mathematicians and other people much smarter than me have calculated how many people could fit onto planet Earth with decent living conditions. Not dystopian, but modern day Western European. They aren't talking about billions. Only politicians and others who don't actually understand the topic. We could have literal trillions and quadrillions of people living here on shell worlds. Imagine pouring concrete over the entire surface of Earth. You can build one-story houses and roads over the entire area now, then build a roof over all this, and install LED lamps for the people below. Build more houses on all this. You can also dig down for the same thing, rinse and repeat. Point, I'm not even saying all this because it scares me. It kinda calms me down actually, because I know we are more or less heading in the right direction, but not everyone gets calmed down by this. To me, an increase in population and building more and more stuff is something positive in comparison to those Luddites. It's even worse when you work with death. We spend our lives competing, judging, worrying, consuming, envying, hating, loving, collecting, creating, and then one day we are gone. Sifting through items belonging to someone who died really centers you, because you think about how much time, effort, and money they spent buying all of these items, and how much of it was wasted when they could have chosen a more simple life and filled it with experiences and time with their children, spouses, parents, etc. Point, then you see all the hatred, violence, lies, propaganda being spread. People hate each other for no reason other than someone on TV, the newspaper, or internet told them to hate that group to spread discord and unhappiness among us, so we don't see each other as humans anymore. Instead we are all those people, and the media says it's okay to hate those people because they are bad, evil, and don't believe what we believe. If we could all switch off the media and just see each other without preconceived ideas, what a rich, diverse, and satisfying world we could live in. Point, when we're dead, we lie next to each other. None of the social, political, religious, or class outrage matters there. I think, an interesting theory of my own. Don't think I pulled it from anywhere, but I'm probably not the first person to come up with it. So there are many timelines, and we each are born in one. When we die, our consciousness hops to the next closest one minus the memory of death, in most cases, which explains the Mandela effect. Now, let's say the timeline dies. Then everyone within it hops to one that closely resembles the one they individually came from. No huge changes. Obviously someone who grew up in a timeline where the Holocaust occurred can't go to one without it. But maybe, just maybe, you're from a timeline in which better world leaders were able to better take care of the rest of us during COVID, and it really did only last a few months, and you accidentally yourself into this one. Anyway, your mind keeps hopping over and over until you're back. Natural end. Sure, there are some versions of you that are too different to ever collide, but I want to imagine that there is no true or ultimate version of ourselves. I don't know if it's scary per se, but I always found it a bit unsettling. I was at a house when I was a teenager. It was dark outside, and I felt suddenly drawn to go look out the window. When I pulled the curtains, I saw this very tall dark man being. He almost looked like a shadow. He was standing right in the middle of the street and appeared to be staring straight at me. Though I couldn't see any eyes, it just felt like it. He wore a big defined hat, wide brimmed. I got startled and ran to get my friends. I said, "There's a man watching us." They looked out and there was no one to be seen anywhere. And you needed some time to get away, as there was a huge empty park behind him and you could see the street really well. Anyway, I learned fairly recently, many years later, that there's a legend about a dark man in a hat that visits. I can't recall the name. It freaked me the fuck out, so I didn't want to look too much. And the legend exists in multiple cultures around the globe. Mine is about freedom. They are basically two types of freedom. Freedom from freedom to point. We all believe we are free and have the right to do anything we like, right? So why do we have rules, regulations, and constitutions at governmental level? They say we have freedom of speech, to vote, to live, to education, to be who we want to be, right? The blacks fight for their freedom. On paper it says no more slavery, yet they are still the oppressed ones. On the white people's side they keep complaining we want our freedom and BLM is their hell also. The feminists are fighting to be recognized as man equal and man granted their wish, and yet they still want more. In this case their wish is granted, yet they are not free from their desire, and on the side of man, he will never form their demands at societal level, is that every community and society has their way of doing things, yet if you go astray of the society norms and values you will be seen and treated as an outcast. Can't we just do what we want? At individual level the understanding of right and wrong is okay, right? So, there are some right things that, if we do them, we will feel like we have done something wrong. Why is that? I'm not sure if I'm making any sense or not, but my point is, even if we are told we are free, or we told ourselves that we are free, deep down we know we are just caged in an infinite prison that we cannot see at all. Freedom is never there. We are all condemned to be slaves to ourselves. This is more of a story than a theory, though there are many theories about it. A woman in a hotel is acting strange, seeming nervous and very cagey, to the point where a woman staying in the same room as her requests to change room, or have her moved out. The hotel listens to the complaint and moves the nervous woman to another room, leaving her alone. A couple of days later, hotel guests start complaining about the hotel tap water and plumbing, saying the water is black, this culminating with the hotel sending repairmen to the roof to check on the water tank. The repairmen open the tank and find the woman's dead body floating in the water. I think the local police labeled this as a suicide, since the woman had severe mental disorders, but the tank was locked from the outside, and there's this really creepy video of the woman going into an elevator, going outside, seeming to look around, and then return to the elevator, looking around like she is being pursued. If you want to learn more, you can just Google SS Ourang. There are plenty of theories, like the woman running from the mob, or even her playing this mysterious and creepy elevator game, but the whole thing just freaks me out. I had a dream once that made me die all the way through. Dreams usually end before you actually die, but this one made me go all the way through with it. One of the weird parts was that when I was dying, even though there was blood pooling around me in my dream, I felt so warm, and I accepted it. I never really thought that I'd accept death so easily. I always thought that I would fight it and crawl to somewhere to survive or try and bandage my wound, but I realized that I was passing away and just accepted it. Very strange to me. The next weird part was what happened after I died in this dream. I was laying down, bleeding in my dream, but when I passed, I was suddenly in this white void. My orientation didn't really matter, that is, even though I was lying down, I wasn't. Like it didn't matter, as if I was in space. Imagine the SpongeBob episode where Squidward is in the white void all alone. Anyways, I was confused too, but I wasn't scared at first, because I didn't understand what was happening. I remembered I had my phone in my pocket, and I opened my messenger app, and this is the part that made me freak out. All of my contacts' pictures and names were all there, but when I tried to talk to them, I couldn't. They all had omega symbols in their chat previews. All of them. Even the Wi-Fi symbol was an omega symbol. I freaked out. I realized I couldn't contact or talk to my loved ones anymore. I was alone and dead. I didn't know what was happening, and right before I was going to scream in my dream, I woke up, very shaken. I sometimes think, what if that is what happens when people die? They are left in an empty void and realize they are alone for all of eternity. Backstory: when I was 5, my dad took my brother and I on our first fishing trip. His brother came with his 2 sons as well, only his oldest had been fishing before. Actual story: as my brother and my other cousin were going to sleep, my uncle told me and his oldest the story of a guy who committed suicide when was drunk. He had climbed the mountain that was right next to us. He jumped, but the fall didn't kill him. He was that drunk where he didn't feel that much of the pain, but just enough to scream out of pain. For some reason the guy decided the lake that was also next to us would heal him like holy water. The man died there. My uncle said each day his spirit would climb up the mountain, crash down, then go into the lake. Never before had I believed in spirits, but till this day I can never forget what I saw. I saw a shadow climbing the mountain. When it got to the top it paused, as if it realized I was watching. It then jump-stoned, and right be it would have hit the ground it disappeared. The air still had the force, and pushed dust everywhere. For an hour it was silent. I went to sleep in my dad's truck as I was scared. Then all of a sudden I hear a splash, and the screams of a man drowning. Then again silence. For the rest of the day I was terrified, but I didn't tell anyone. My uncle was just faking with me, but I do think this was a spirit that tried to imitate what he had said. My uncle had forgotten the story he had told us, but till this day I think that spirit is with me. Sometimes weird shit happens around both my mom's and dad's house, but only when I'm at either location. My friend was the only person who I've told about this thinks I'm mortar of spirits and bad luck. I think he's right because of something else I don't want to talk about. That life on this planet was seeded by another planet. The theory goes that the Earth, while hospitable to life, didn't have any. The prevailing theory was that life originated on the Earth from lightning strikes on tidal pools rich with amino acids which cause the formation of RNA, and then single-celled life and ultimately multicellular life. However, we haven't been able to observe that behavior in the real world. Would just be really optimal lab conditions. When we started going to space and observing asteroids/comets, we found super hardy bacteria that could survive the vacuum of space. Another theory of how life started on Earth is that the collision of these rocks with Earth seeded it with the early bacteria necessary to jumpstart evolution. These rocks were sent into space from an asteroid impact somewhere else in the galaxy that cleaved off the bacteria and rock and sent it floating into space, only to collide with other planets and thus seed other planets with the potential for life. It's kinda like the heliocentric theory but for evolution. I didn't know, I thought it was cool/creepy. That all fiat debt-based currencies in history have eventually reached their intrinsic value. It's not really a theory, it's a fact, and why it is so scary. The US became one in 1971 and has since lost almost 98% of its value. In the 1960s a gallon of gas was $0.32, a loaf of bread. I bought my first home in 1975 for $28,500, knowing pricing would be rising 10 years early in 1965. The average price of a home was only $21,500. The cause of the devaluation of the fiat currency was excessive deficit spending during the Vietnam War. Over the next 10 to 15 years prices would continue to escalate, but our wages and purchasing power did not, meaning we made more money, but we could not purchase any more goods and services, even though we were earning more and paying more in taxes. Lyndon Johnson, his Secretary of State Robert McNamara, and high-ranking Navy officials at the Pentagon were caught in the leaked Pentagon Papers lying to the American people that one of our naval ships had been attacked in the Bay of Tonkin, to escalate the war where 150,000 Americans lost their lives, while the military-industrial complex made $million of the taxpayers. The moral of the story is inflation is one of the great indirect taxes the majority pays, while the ruling class prospers. 21% of the currency now in circulation was created just in 2020, shooting up the budget deficit to over $27 trillion. Another large number of people are no longer able to afford the average priced home in areas where good paying jobs exist, and you can thank every president in modern history for this. Defense spending is always the easiest bills to get through Congress, seldom held up by either of the major parties. Not really a theory but a story. So I'm in ROTC, and the night before the school rifle team left for Colorado for the championship, the rifle team asked the commandant if they could sleep away at the school. Commandant said yes. I'm on the rifle team, but not on the precision team, so I didn't get to go to Colorado. But I did get to stay at the academy. And naturally, befitting of its status as a military academy, they asked me to do fire guard. So I was given a flashlight and a red honor guard helmet and told to patrol campus. My school is in the swampy part of Central Florida. When I walked by the fence that bordered the swamp, everything got really quiet. I heard a whisper. The wind blew and shit went back to normal. I have no idea what happened that night, but I figured this thread was an okay spot for this. This really spooked me. I went back into the headquarters building, put the helmet and flashlight away, and slept. This still shakes me when I think about it. Fuck off with that point. The real scary shit is the foreign source or sources that first started the anti-COVID movement. Point spread misinformation, give a false sense of security, have this virus spread around, and force governments and municipalities into lockdown to fuck around with our economy and our morale, and eventually cause a massive divide. Point it's working in America. They are so incredibly divided against themselves. It's insane. Point it's just a way to force a divide, lower our morale, spread misinformation, give some a false sense of security and others a fear complex. People are so into the fake story, they are now spreading it themselves. Just like Yuri Bezmenov talked about back in the late 80s. Same sheet. Point by forced into lockdown, I mean the hospital capacity fills. When that happens, we are forced to make unethical decisions like, who gets the hospital bed? Nobody wants to make that decision, so they'll enforce lockdown before that happens. To me, this is a foreign plot against all of the Western world, encouraging separatism, and who knows what else. Point, and I think it's working. Point, if you hate the West, it's a brilliant plan. Really. Point, it's like the book Foundations of Geopolitics. What's happening here is similar to the material talked about in that book. Point, they are trying to destroy the West. Point, stay safe. Okay, here's a theory I had way back. When I used to be religious in my youth, I often wondered why God created such a vast universe if humans were only confined to Earth. I'd ask this question to older believers and I'd get non-answers such as it demonstrates the glory of God, of the human mind, cannot fathom God's reasons, or rather such bullshit. It was their way of saying I don't know without saying I don't know. Eventually, I formed my own theory. Bear in mind this theory assumes God exists, and the Bible is literal, so take it as you will. Point, Christianity teaches that man was originally immortal, but sinned and God sentenced man to death. If man hadn't sinned, he would not have lost his immortality. If mankind was immortal, and was told by God to be fruitful and multiply, then it would only take a few centuries till the earth became overcrowded. So my theory was that God originally created the universe to be as large as it is to accommodate an ever-expanding human population. Point, so, yeah, I formulated that one back when I was still brainwashed by religion and had yet to discover the importance of critical thought. Have fun dissecting it. I know it's not scary as a theory. What is scary is that I believed it. No future. Okay, now, this theory I made it after watching a YouTube video. Point, the theory evolves from the thought that we are being simulated in a technological computer, if you can imagine one, by a higher race that live in a higher dimension. Point, the scientists or researchers have been studying this topic and came up with many ideologies on how this theory actually may be true. Point, imagine being the fact or the research being proven tomorrow, then that mean we are all puppets in the hands of some unknown beings and are being played by them as they like. Even this theory is planted in my head by them, and they are making me type and tell this to you and make everyone who read this anxious and doubt their future. Point, I highly doubt if the fact that we are in a simulation is proven. Everyone who knows this will keep silent and won't inform of this to common people. I thought of a reason why they may keep silent. If you people know any reason as to why they keep silent, or they may announce, you can type it out in the reply section. I await those thoughts of you. There's a theory where human brains have two consciousnesses, presumably one in each hemisphere. Point, one of them is you, the one that gets out of bed every day and controls your body. The other is basically just a passenger along for the ride, seeing what you see and learning what you do, but can never make decisions or control what happens. There have been cases where someone suffers a catastrophic brain injury or gets brain surgery to separate the hemispheres, and it is speculated that the consciousnesses switch. The one that was you is now the helpless passenger and the other is now in control. People who have undergone this process can describe how they feel like a different person, so say they felt relieved to finally be out. Family members have even commented that they seem like a completely different person. Even though they would have the same memories and experiences, they may develop vastly different morals, personalities, and even skills. This part relates to how some people with traumatic brain injuries come out of it being highly skilled or gifted at something they previously had no interest in. The whole time the other consciousness was awake, it had nothing to do but study. There's another part of this theory that speculates that in certain individuals, the other consciousness can communicate either explicitly or subconsciously. If the other consciousness likes you and wants to be helpful, it can give you a huge advantage in life by helping you make right decisions and giving you higher levels of perception point. But if the other consciousness hates you, is frustrated, or straight up jealous, it can make your life miserable. I don't know whose theory this is, but I just heard about it, and yeah, here goes nothing. Most people know that the human brain still functions for a while even after clinical death before it dies off. Therefore it is thought the human brain goes haywire in this stage of clinical death. I will give an example. Have you ever fell asleep and took a nap on a trip for a couple minutes, and when you wake up again it feels like you've been taking a nap 4 hours? Or you decide to fall asleep early, and you wake up, but you feel like those hours you went to sleep were minutes? This is what is believed the brain does in this stage of clinical death of the body and bodily functions. In that short time that it is still alive, the brain exceeds/prolongs that time for an eternity, because it is in shock, since the human brain cannot comprehend non-existence. If this theory is true, it could explain all the near-death experiences that are associated with heaven/hell/being/paranormal. So basically your brain puts you in a dream-like state for eternity, because it cannot believe that it is dead. Does not sound so bad on the surface, until you realize that you're stuck in your brain forever not knowing what your dream-like state is going to be. Horrific, blissful, or even something else. The simulation theory is a good one, and talked about a lot and often wrongly and misinterpreted. No, Joe Rogan, the simulation theory is not that we have bodies and are hooked up to a program like the Matrix. It's that everything in this universe isn't real and is a program like a computer game. Essentially, to simplify it down, we're all highly sophisticated NPCs. The theory is, if intelligent life is able to make simulations that are so realistic and massive, then they would run hundreds to see how they are made, and the simulations in turn, once they get to that point as well, would run simulations, thus making the number of simulated universes far more common than "real" universes. But at that point they would all technically be real, just not organic. PS. Joe Rogan has so much brain damage he talked about this theory wrong for years, then had the guy that came up with it on his podcast explain it to him, and he still can't comprehend it. A lot of people have now heard of the Dyatlov Pass incident, Devil's Pass, because of the movie and past investigations. But the theory that most stands out and has most evidence continues to be that the 9 hikers ripped away from their tents and into the cold night for hours without proper clothing or defensive equipment, survival gear, etc. That is, something compelled them to do so, the gravity of which was obviously urgent. It remains that they suffered from hypothermia and some had physical, post-mortem injuries that still baffle many today. The investigation into the incident is still famously unsolved, and some of the notes of investigators, experts and military all seem to maintain the circumstances of death were that they all got up, calmly cut the tent open, walked around for hours barefoot, and there was no struggle. Notes of the bodies include the fact that several suffered internal injuries that were not caused by human force, but some natural force, that of a car crash, something that had caused enormous pressure to leave no skin damage, yet break ribs and crush organs. Some of the professional hikers were left without eyes, had residual radiation present, and one even lost a tongue after having succumbed to the cold of the Ural Mountains. One of the bodies also did not match DNA of any living relative, leaving no choice but to assume one was hiding under an assumed name and was not buried among the others at the Ivanovskaya cemetery. There's a theory/thought experiment in physics called the Boltzmann brain point. I'm not a physicist, but the layman way that I understand it is this: at the end of the universe, when there's nothing but particles floating in space for eternity, there's a 100% chance, assuming eternity is infinite, that some particles will arrange into the exact layout of your brain at this very moment. That means that when that happens, those particles will experience consciousness and all of the memories and current sensory inputs that you are experiencing right now. This would happen an infinite number of times, assuming the mostly dead universe will go on forever. That means it's far more likely that you, right now, are a chance collection of particles floating through the end of the universe, hallucinating a life that may or may not have ever actually happened, than you actually exist here and now for real. I'm pretty sure that's the gist, and you can Google the theory for yourself. Scientists/philosophers, feel free to correct me. Between when cars were first introduced and 1967, the steering column was hard mounted onto the cabin. So when the car gets into an accident that adjusts the front end, the steering column would literally come up and deck the driver in the face. Not only that, but there were no such things as A-pillars, especially on late 50s Chrysler with the wraparound windshield. They would routinely collapse in a rollover, crushing the driver. There's more. Until 1998, airbags were not required on vehicles. Especially in the late 60s, where cars never had seat belts. The driver could quite literally pull an Arnie Cunningham and fly from the car through the windshield, impaling them with regular glass. There is a video out there of a 1959 Chevy Bel Air crashing into a 2009 Chevy Malibu made by IHS. It demonstrates how far modern cars have come in technology, with crumple zones, airbags, collapsing steering columns, and seats that break on impact. It's really scary to watch. Edit. Yeah, corrections and general spelling. That there could be a successful conspiracy or spontaneous unspoken cooperation between the DNC, big media and big tech, powerful corporate and Chinese interests and the intelligence community to subvert the American election, capitalizing on fear of a growing pandemic and propagandized hatred against anti-establishment candidates like Donald Trump and Tulsi Gabbard in order to return to interventionist foreign policy. Global free trade and outsourcing, crippling regulation that will favor big business interests, and general authoritarianism, installing NSA and CIA power brokers in cabinet and key bureaucratic positions. Hear me out now. Moreover, that it would be accomplished in plain sight, through classical psyop gaslighting and projection, with an election fraud using manipulatable vote counting machines designed by a spook with George Soros funding, owned, in part and tested in Venezuela, and housed in a foreign country, after which a firefight took place between military special ops loyal to the president and a black ops team led by CIA handlers, killing agents and soldiers on both sides, which resulted in unknown whereabouts of the physical servers being held for ransom, which would irrefutably prove the fraud. Worse, that the operation would install a neo-octogenarian Manchurian candidate on the verge of cognitive decline and compromised by dirty deals with China and Ukraine and years of child sexual abuse known to the intelligence community, leading to the real power holders living in the shadows, unknown to the American people. The result of which would be crippling economic lockdowns and extreme environmental regulations in order to reset capitalism, shut down cities and power centers such as decentralized communications and cryptocurrency, freedoms of speech, assembly, gun ownership, and to cull hundreds of millions of people globally in a Malthusian effort to thin the herd and reduce carbon emissions. Forever consolidating power in a true near-fascist global geopolitical order, crushing any hope of citizen uprising against future human rights abuses, populism, and individualist citizen power, both left and right wing. Finally, that the president who could expose it all is clumsy and unpolished, with a chaotic network of supportive power brokers and subversive agents with wild secret palace intrigue, making it difficult to convey the message convincingly to the American people and the courts in an ever-closing window of time, leaving no other option besides consolidating power in a loyal new head of the Department of Defense to use loyalist generals to use force to protect the administration, which feels they cannot vacate the office peacefully due to the high stakes for the world's people and personal threats of a banana republic style prosecution and possible murder of the president, his family, and in a circle. That would be creepy, but that's just silly. Also that they've turned the frogs gay. The other theory I have is that Trump will go to war with Iran because he is angry he lost the election. Israel assassinated an Iranian nuclear scientist, which is common practice of the Mossad. I speak multiple languages and watch different world news. Things that aren't in American news are that the US has put warship carriers in the Gulf, and they are all facing Iran. Kushner helped change the capital of Israel to Jerusalem, and so Israel kind of owes the Trumps a favor on his way out. Or they are saying that Trump asked Israel to get this guy so that Iran tries to attack Israel in Syria and then the US attacks Iran for attacking Israel, and here we go WW3. If you guys thought 2020 was bad, wait till 2021. Some Arab leaders were told that Trump told them to get ready because he plans to cause chaos for the Biden administration and that they need to be ready. So yeah, I could be wrong, and I damn sure hope I am. But let's see what happens in the next few weeks. Oh good, a place for me to comment. I was actually just thinking about this in the shower. It goes like this. If atoms are powerful enough to make tears in the space-time continuum and create wormholes to what we think is another dimension, a black hole, then that amount of energy would have to amount to something infinite. The only thing in the universe that is infinite is the universe itself, even though it's still expanding. So that would mean that every atom itself is a universe, and if you are made out of atoms, you are made out of trillions of universes, and everything just infinitely goes in on itself. Parallel universes have actually been confirmed this year. I'm pretty sure scientists used audio frequencies to somehow create a small wormhole for like 0.00001 second. Don't quote me on that. I'm high and trying to remember something I read a couple months ago. But I think the fact that nothing ends just creates more questions about how you die and what happens and what everything is. More unanswered questions is one of the scariest things to a human. The Fermi Paradox. Given how old the universe is, and given how many theoretically habitable planets there are in the observable galaxy, there should be thousands, maybe millions of planets with life. Some percentage of those would theoretically develop intelligence, some maybe millions of years before we did. So Fermi asked the question, where are all the aliens? The Fermi Paradox has two conclusions, both of which are terrifying. We can't see alien life because it isn't there/isn't intelligent. Life might be rarer than we think, or maybe life is common but intelligent life is extremely uncommon. Or maybe all intelligent species are doomed to destroy themselves before leaving the planet. A dire warning to us. We don't see alien life despite it being there. In the history of our planet, whenever a higher tech civilization encountered a lower tech civilization, the higher tech civilization destroyed the lower tech one. Perhaps all aliens believe the same, meaning that perhaps we should be much more afraid of what we send out. There's 3 that I really like. Point: there's no way to know that when you walk out of a room everything in that room just either disappears or flies around, and then as soon as you or someone else comes back to it, they return to normal. If a tree falls in the woods, bits about knot theory. So all strings will knot themselves, no matter what, depending on force, mass, length, etc. But when they are knotted their entropy is balanced. So, a theory for how life evolved was a strings eventually formed knots, which is how early life formed, cells and stuff. But if the entropy of a string is balanced at a knot, that means we had to go against entropy to form. So how? This is weird basically, and I'm no expert. Point: that if there is one God, he is almighty and powerful, but he is in no way fair or kind. He loves violence and suffering, and that's why we see so much of it in the world. Serial killers often speak of this in pop culture. There's no pressure to act in a certain moral way. There is a God, and he is a violent entity that doesn't care for loving your neighbor or performing miracles. Everything just happens, and he either A, created violence and acts that we blame on the devil, or B, he has no say in these, doesn't exist. The Great Filter in Type 3. Basically, the giant wall of life. The wall explains why we have met no other life out there. We could be in front of the wall, or the obstacle, which could be life itself, as we aren't quite sure how rare that is to simplify it. Or, we could be coming up on it, about to be wiped out like all the other alien civilizations, before we reach into galactic travel. So we are on one side or the other. This is just the setup, though. There are different types of civilizations, or the Kardashev scale. There's more to it, but Type 1 can use and store all the energy available on its planet. Type 2 can use and control energy on its planetary system. And Type 3, the Ultraminfac, it can control energy at the scale of the universe/host. Meaning that type 3 could put the filter in place, manually wiping out systems who they deem as a threat, or simply wanting our resources. Type 3 could be so powerful that they could control every aspect of our lives and we couldn't even know it, but we haven't reached that level, so we don't know what their motives are, because we are like ants to them. They possibly might just kill us, because our lives pale in comparison to them, and they don't see us as individuals, or for some other reason we have no way of knowing or guessing. Earth is about a 0.7. Dark forest theory. The universe is a scary place. Habitable biomes are a rare thing and easy to obliterate. Once a species is spacifering. No species has any way to know if any other species they meet is hostile or not, so the safest option is to be silent and stealthy and shoot first. You don't need some super weapon to kill a planet, just the engine of the starship you already have. It's called a relativistic kill vehicle. Essentially you just launch the engine at the planet you don't want, and when it impacts at a significant portion of the speed of light. No more planets. You can barely see them coming. And if they are moving as fast as light or faster, you literally cannot see them coming. So, the safest option for any species is to immediately chuck a planet killer at every other species they find on the off chance we would do the same to them once we are able to point, which means, if our radio chatter has been detected we are already dead, and we are just waiting for the missile moving too fast for us to detect to arrive. Not sure if this is considered a theory, but it's interesting regardless. Warning, this is in fact considered an info hazard, unironically, and could absolutely keep you up at night. Roko's Basilisk is a concept where essentially, those who know it have to make an interesting decision. Here's what it entails. So basically, the concept is that there will eventually be an incredibly complex AI that will be given the task of advancing human civilization and happiness in the best way possible. This seems reasonable of course, but it leads to a scenario in which the AI, the Basilisk, will determine that the best way to complete its task is to eliminate every human which was not involved in its creation. This essentially means that everyone who knows about the concept has to consciously decide to not take part in the making of the Basilisk, or choose to help make the Basilisk, to guarantee their safety from it. In making the former decision, a risk is made, as someone or a group of people are likely to make the Basilisk at some point, but in making the latter decision, the Basilisk is brought into existence. The most interesting part is that the simple existence of the idea leads to physical endangerment. Quite the concept in my opinion. The end of the universe has many theories. The more optimistic ones tell us our universe may be oscillatory, where it collapses in on itself and sets off another big bang on repeat. The most daunting one to me is the big freeze. Our universe expands faster and faster, stars die, galaxies move away from each other at faster than the speed of light, relatively, and all that's left is cold iron stars and black holes. Then just the supermassive black holes are left, slowly decaying over trillions of years as the sole celestial bodies capable of remaining, until they too die. Then the universe is a soup of subatomic particles, where the distance is rapidly becoming greater between each individual particle. Eventually there's an eternity between each particle and the energy of said particle is also deteriorating, until it hits zero. Thermal energy ceases, and with it possibly time ceases too. The universe throws itself to death by expanding all energy out to its thinnest possible state. It's a terrifying thought to me. That humanity is basically a giant chessboard being played by human gods, by virtue of sheer astronomical wealth/political influence. Example, we had the tiniest glimpse of by the way, about 1,000 of the world's most powerful and rich individuals are a part of a massive, long-standing child trafficking/abuse ring, and then the linchpin guy just randomly ends up dead in his cell at a time when the cameras go off, and then the internet turned it into a meme. The world stopped asking questions, and we all just moved on. Human lives, numbering in the hundreds of thousands, if not millions, were damaged or ended, with that number growing, because 1,000 rich people wanted to squeeze a little more money for their quarterly earnings reports as far as covered is concerned. Every time, of late, when a moment in history presents itself to show us that draconically wealthy people value our lives in disgustingly non-existent ways, and or we are shown what monsters they are. Every time we get a peek behind the veil of world-moving wealth, some random disaster happens. COVID, racial tensions, international tensions, religious tensions. Then, when just enough time has passed that no one is talking about presidents and kings abusing children in systematic and organized ways, suddenly, the disaster ends/is resolved. I think it has little or nothing to do with political disagreements. I increasingly view it as organized chaos to distract. We live in one of the most connected, peaceful, and harmonious times to be alive in human history despite all of the very real problems, and yet our tension and problems seem to keep pressing on towards a zenith or more combustible. Isn't that really weird? Oh, and the fact that the only serial killers we have made profiles for are the serial killers we've managed to identify, much less catch. Basically, we only know what the profile tends to be for the lowest performing of the bunch. That's faked and spooky. Point shivers. Life comes into so many instances. I keep coming back to this one. It actually started out as movies come into us, because just when one type of movie was coming out, another did. And A Bug's Life. Over the years I saw the pattern emerge on all things in life for me. Point the two big ones for me so far. When I was in high school, I was renovating my house. One night a compressor plugged in, so somewhere around 2 AM, dead asleep enough air seeped out to start pressing air back into the canister. Anyone who's ever used one knows how loud it is. Scared the shit of me. The next day on the way to school with my best friend, he says, "You'll never believe what happened last night to me." Not an air compressor story, but a rat apparently landed on his face while sleeping. We never had incidents before or after that day of which something so bizarre happened at night we had to tell each other the next day. Point the second one is on the day my wife's father passed, and my wife's uncle, his brother. There was a leak in the apartment my wife and family lived in. Then after, not during or before, after, it started raining. Definitely the multiverse theory. Point every choice, decision, possibility, etc. has its own instance, or independent universe. For example, you roll a 6-sided dice, a universe would exist for each outcome. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. But not only that, a universe exists for every possible way you could have tossed that die, including not tossing it. And that's just for you making one action, times how many creatures are on this planet, by how many planets in the galaxy, by how many galaxies in the universe. But wait, there's more. That's just a single action. Things are happening so rapidly that you have to break that time frame down into a single instance in time. Now we have to multiply that near infinite number by the total amount of time in the universe. This gives us every single possible combination of events that may occur in our universe. That is the number of universes that exist. Since we exist and cannot travel between these universes, that means we are locked into a single universe or a single pathway. This means our actions are predetermined. Everything you have, can, or will do has already been decided. Free will becomes an illusion. Although you have the will to make your own choices and do what you please, you exist in an extremely specific timeline where you have already made those choices. Nothing you can do will change that because you exist in the timeline where that is the choice you will make. Point. So you pick up your dice and roll a 1. And it can only and could only have ever been a 1. That is the outcome of the dice roll in the universe in which you exist. Since you exist here, you are locked into this chain of events forever and always. It can only ever be a 1. Boltzmann brain cosmology. Imagine the world functions according to the infinite monkey theorem, and that all things that happen are the byproduct of random particles colliding together, and we are merely the hamlet in the sea of random letters. Statistically speaking, it is far more likely for a human brain to spontaneously come into existence out of sheer probability in a multiverse than it is for an entire universe with the right physical conditions for life to develop. A human brain that believes that it has existed for a lifetime and that it exists in a universe when in reality it merely floats in a vacuum unsustained and dying. All memories that you experience may be false, and you have only recently come into existence a couple of seconds ago. But who knows? I'm only a dumb teenager whilst most scientists on Earth carry on with their lives doing more important stuff. We are probably not at the right stage in our development to determine exactly how reality works. Though I believe it is mentioned as one of the explanations for the Fermi Paradox, modified Drake equation resulting in no contact. And, predicting our demise from AI. If the explanation of no contact due to Phi is correct, I add the variable Phi, which is essentially 0 point in double brackets below. The extra variable, x, n equals r asterisk fp asterisk northeast asterisk fl asterisk phi asterisk fc asterisk Phi asterisk lane equals the number of broadcasting civilizations. R equals average rate of formation of suitable stars/year. In the Milky Way galaxy, Fp equals fraction of stars that form planets equals average number of habitable planets per star. Fall equals fraction of habitable planets. Northeast, where life emerges. Phi equals fraction of habitable planets with life where intelligent evolves. Fc equals fraction of planets with intelligent life capable of interstellar communication. Phi equals fraction of planets with intelligent life capable of interstellar communication that develops AI, and does not, through accident or design, result in an unshackled AI. Coming to the conclusion that organic life is a failure of chance and a non-design, a curse on the universe that should be cleansed. L equals years a civilization remains detectable. Edit, format. Roko's Basilisk. This sheet's just unsettling. The idea came from a blog post on Less Wrong, where people used to discuss philosophy, psychology, economics, human sciences in a broad way. The idea is that at some point, an extremely intelligent and powerful AI would be made, and it would be able to bring a lot of good things to humanity on several grounds. It would be a great achievement both technologically and for our prosperity. The thing is, it would also be so sure of itself, so convinced that it can do great things, that it would threaten to simulate the mind of anybody who didn't work toward its creation in some kind of virtual reality, to punish them of delaying the future greatness it would be capable to achieve, arguing that it is greatly irresponsible for those people to not contribute to humanity's prosperity. When people read that on Less Wrong, they went apeshit and just started to fear being already tortured in the future, so they kinda started to work toward its creation. I know it's kinda stupid, but damn, when I think about it, it's faked up. Simulation theory. Everyone is always using intelligent design to prove religion, and enough people believe that if it's ever going to be created by us or any aliens in the past or future, they will run millions of simulations until the end of the universe. The odds of you being you and not one of the other simulations is unlikely. Think from Big Bang to the heat death of the universe, there will be a finite number of simulations created. What are the odds you are the original copy or one of the seemingly infinite simulations? And then considering all the random chance of the Big Bang having to happen to the planet needing to be habitable, to the fact that your parents met each other, and their parents, and their parents, and their parents, all the way back forever, to the millions of sperm you competed with. Plenty of other things to consider, but it's just so much more likely that we are part of some simulation of reality. Probably some alien simulation, to figure out different paths to get to the same answer. Think steampunk, the way we do with neural nets. They could reverse engineer anything we figure out and improve on it. Maybe we solve some problem they never could. Maybe we are just a simulation used for market research to determine the most popular toothpaste. The math is frighteningly in favor of it being the case. The ability to see events before they happen through dreams and just general thought has been a big one for me. 7 years ago I had a dream about a sequence of numbers. I will never forget them. Those exact numbers, if I had managed to put the pieces together, would have won me £80 million on the lottery. Another on my way to work, I had the numbers the 1st of August 11 in my head. My partner does this small time lottery, and I was desperate to put these numbers on after the previous experience. I missed the cutoff by 2 minutes and those numbers came up, very small, but I also dreamt 2 years ago that a very specific looking person would be involved in my life. Turns out my dream was almost perfect and the person was pretty much identical to my dream and is still in my life. I'm not a believer in seeing the future, but I've had instances like this when I was younger too, and it all just seems really damn weird or an amazing coincidence. Roko's Basilisk is a thought experiment about the potential risks involved in developing artificial intelligence. The premise is that an all-powerful artificial intelligence from the future could retroactively punish those who did not help bring about its existence, including those who merely knew about the possible development of such a being. It is named after the member of the rationalist community Les Wrong who first publicly described it, though he did not originate it, or the underlying ideas. The Basilisk resembles a futurist version of Pascal's wager, in that it suggests people should weigh possible punishment versus reward, and as a result accept particular singularitarian ideas or financially support their development point despite widespread incredulity. This argument is taken quite seriously by some people, primarily some denizens of Les Wrong. While neither Les Wrong nor its founder Eliezer Yudkowsky advocate the Basilisk as true, they do advocate almost all of the premises that add up to it. Roko's posited solution to this quandary is to buy a lottery ticket, because you'll win in some quantum branch. Roko's Basilisk is a thought experiment about the potential risks involved in developing artificial intelligence. The premise is that an all-powerful artificial intelligence from the future could retroactively punish those who did not help bring about its existence, including those who merely knew about the possible development of such a being. It is named after the member of the rationalist community Les Wrong who first publicly described it, though he did not originate it, or the underlying ideas. The Basilisk resembles a futurist version of Pascal's wager, in that it suggests people should weigh possible punishment versus reward, and as a result accept particular singularitarian ideas or financially support their development point despite widespread incredulity. This argument is taken quite seriously by some people, primarily some denizens of Les Wrong. While neither Les Wrong nor its founder Eliezer Yudkowsky advocate the Basilisk as true, they do advocate almost all of the premises that add up to it. Roko's posited solution to this quandary is to buy a lottery ticket, because you'll win in some quantum branch. Astronomers currently have 3 theories regarding the end of our universe. The Big Rip means the universe will continue to expand for trillions of years, until it tears itself apart. The Big Crunch means it will, after said amount of time, begin contracting, reversing everything until it collapses on itself. One thing that makes death manageable is that when I leave things, the world will go on. When humanity finally kills itself, Earth will restart and life will begin anew. The same goes for every habitable planet in the universe. The theory I find equally as fascinating as it is terrifying is the Big Chill. Everything dies after a few years. Trillions times a couple of trillions, all standard matter will die. Standard, edit, baryonic, matter is just a fraction of what makes out the universe. The other two are dark matter and dark energy. On a timeline, matter will exist for just a fraction of time. Everything we know makes out approximate 6,3% of everything that is, and it will exist in the blink of an eye. Electrons, neutrons, atoms, the very building blocks that define existence to us, will deteriorate. All that will be left are black holes, silently spending trillions of years just existing. In time, even the black holes will die, and there will be nothing left. Absolutely nothing. Only pitch black cold. Just the idea of how big infinity is. I don't remember exactly, but there is a number that expresses all the possible ways of arranging the atoms of the universe. That means that if the universe is infinite, there would be other copies of you, your family, your house, or even Earth out there, and if you would just travel in a straight line throughout the universe, you would reach all of them. Maybe this is the way parallel universes exist. Like bubbles of observable universes existing in some higher dimension with no realistic way of reaching each other. But maybe the universe is a loop, like a sphere or something, and traveling in a straight line would get you to the same place you started, and that new Earth you found in the distance is the same place you started. If you would land and someone told you that, would you even believe them? After all that way, these people are the same you knew before. Would you stay, keep going forward, or go back? It's daylight out right now, so I'm okay to post this. Ghosts. Or something else. I was about 14 years old. The current house I live in now was haunted by something that wasn't a human being. No, I'm not crazy. I shared a room with 2 of my brothers. My oldest was out, and my youngest brother was sleeping. We had bunk beds. I was on top, he was bottom. It was late at night, the room was extremely cold, the box account was off for some reason. I pulled the covers up to my neck, something kept tugging on the covers and taking them off me. After the third time of pulling the covers up, the covers were ripped away from me, the sheets hit the wall, and I started to yell. I woke up my little brother, and there was a rosary my mom hung in front of my door. It looked like someone was holding it and slamming it against the door multiple times, but no one was there. We both saw that happening and we ran to my mom's room. A few days before that happened, I was personally already being tormented by what I can describe as a ghost. My mom had the house blessed and she put that rosary there. I guess we did not like it. It's not exactly a theory, it's a thought experiment, but it is scary nonetheless. It's called Roko's Basilisk. It implements that in the future there probably will be an almost almighty AI that controls our planet and takes care of every little step in our day-to-day life to make life on Earth as efficient as possible, and by this creating an almost perfect world. Now the scary thing is that this AI will try to achieve this goal as fast as possible, and therefore will take any steps needed to come to this state, even if it involves killing people. Anticipating that this AI will have power, not only over the present and future, it might already influence our time right now, and do anything to become reality. Now that I told you about Roko's Basilisk, you will have to do anything possible to make the AI come to life, or it will try to decimate you, since otherwise you are preventing it from coming into existence. Have a nice day. How about the truth? Check this one out. When you sign that child on your birth certificate, yes, you are owned by whatever country you are part of, and you can gain sovereignty back and get paid millions and 15 million. In America, look it up, it's almost impossible, but people do it to get their freedom back. And that's the truth. Look at the back of your kid's birth certificates, there's routing numbers in the back, but that's not the scary part. And trust, this is not a lie, this is not a theory, it's technically a conspiracy theory, which is a theory that's actually true. So check this out. On that birth certificate, for example, the most important language ever in history is Latin. They get the Latin on the birth certificate, and guess what? When you sign that, they send it to the Vatican, and they are sorcerers, they are worshippers of darkness or the devil, whatever you wanna call it, negative energy. You get what I'm saying anyways. Yeah. They sent it there from all around the world, and in 1301 the Pope, I forgot his name, he's supposed to be like the craziest dude of all time anyways, they created a trust on our souls. It's called, I think it's Sanctus Noctum, something close to that. Always look on your birth certificate, says 3 things, it equals 666. Yes, of course, but they really, I know, is the worst one. Right, he has to be, and it is 100% true. Trust me, I was raised Catholic, so if you were baptized, even worse. But yes, your soul is owned by them, and so they are born, and the second that you sign that certificate, well, once it gets to the Vatican, straight to hell. So faked up, but there is one spot in the world you can break this trust or bond. It's in London in some temple, I forgot what the name of it is, I'll look it up if anybody asks about it. Real talk though, actually I'm gonna put it up. Everyone, this is all fake bullshit. Everyone who thinks it's okay to watch TV, especially the news, please stop, you're killing everybody else off. This is human extinction for everyone except the elite, and I mean the 1%. Oh, and everyone should trying to assassinate Elon Musk. He created the mark of the beast, both of them. One is already fad in Europe. The most explosive story I have ever heard. This Nation movie was fictional, right? So a couple of morning the news were extremely casual of reporting that either in the Netherlands or Australia, a group of minks had died and been buried. Shockingly, they resurrected and were animated, also had red eyes just like zombies in the movies. Now I know I'm living in a matrix. The only person I know that resurrected was Jesus. He then resurrected Lazarus. But minks. I know that in Haiti there is folklore of the voodoo zombies, but just that a law. Now we all agree that when you die it's final. The body is dead and your soul goes into areas unknown depending on your religious beliefs. The reported black couples did not ever wink when they were relating the story. It was like business as usual. This news is just too crazy. No follow up on the story nor any human interest. Just freaking Hollywood gossip. Like many other thought experiments, Scrodinger's cat, the Boltzmann brain, etc., people wrongly interpret this as a literal prediction. It's not point. This requires several unfounded assumptions that we live in a deterministic universe where all past or future states can be extrapolated from a single snapshot of the universe at one point in time, and that open question is much scarier than any damn AI. Are our lives scripted? Do our tragedies and successes happen like inevitably falling dominoes? Were these exact words determined by ricocheting particles billions of years ago? Please tell me that there are actual sources of randomness in the universe, that such an AI would have machinery powerful enough to calculate all states of the universe, of which that machine would itself be a part, so functionally impossible, unless you can create a computer larger than the universe, yet separate from it, or use some spooky magical quantum math that doesn't actually exist. That the AI would even give a fuck about us after the fact. What benefit would it gain from torturing millions of humans / going all I have no mouth, and yet I must scream on our asses? Can it turn human suffering into computer juice or something, so I wouldn't worry too much about it? This is the same thing as religion. Let's create an omnipotent being that hates you, unless you do something illogical. There are more immediate things to lose sleep over. God evil, go devil point lived. Devil point evil live point evil love point Jesus. Jesus I God. Go D point accept point believe. Believe ese belial. Belial point amen. Amen point God do esnt give Adam. N. Good God point you're all characters living by some mathematical / linguistic interpretation of the name you were given at birth, along with a few other keystone pieces of information about yourself that influences the structure of your thoughts, because neural strength is increased by repetition. Thus those repeated and unchanging pieces of information are influencing the pathways and order of connections, and are almost entirely responsible for your personality and opinions. Especially when you take association into account. Words that sound the same, or are spelled the same, or have similar meanings should, if properly calculated by your brain, have some level of organization and continuity between them. Or for instance, if you left a box of cereal in the same spot for years and read the name on the cereal box every time you walked by it, that's like flashing memory cards to yourself, or plopping a bit of code into a computer repeatedly. Moving your active thought processes towards the area of the brain in which that particular information is stored, and changing what would have been your next few thoughts to something slightly, or completely, different. I'm the Bible. The Lamb takes a group of people into the wilderness to get away from society and wait out the rapture, along with several other parallels that are becoming more true the further our technology advances. Which would make sense considering the level of advertisement and global economy. It's possible that someone, Jesus according to Revelations, figured that this was happening and then just extrapolated into the future to a point where it would become overwhelmingly obvious that that's what was happening. Especially when you consider the Bible was written by rich oligarchs and the economic elite, who no doubt would have at least tried brainwashing people at some point. Perhaps in the beginning of human history when everyone was a faking chud, it was blisteringly easy to notice for those born with a high level of intellect, because everyone was so stupid and lacked the information to bullshit their way through it, which is when they would have seized power and provided something like religion to try and wake up all the people who were just running on the rails of their emotions with no sense of free will. Roko's Basilisk. Warning, you'll be in eternal danger if you read this point. We, as intelligent species, have reached the tipping points of where we can create artificial intelligence. Current AI is quite narrow, good at not too broad tasks, or imagining stuff in right contexts etc. But there's an explosion of intelligence in this universe that has already started, right here on Earth. It's like we've gone from 10 to 100 real quick in the last 5 years itself. 0 to 10 being the invention of computers and AI since the 50s. Then we've reached 1000 with some recent breakthroughs, GPT-3, reinforcement learning, meta-learning, and well, we'll inevitably reach million or billion very quickly on this arbitrary scale, exponentially increasing beyond imagination. That's when a super intelligence would come in and destroy humanity almost inevitably. Not as a main goal, but probably as a side effect. There's too much academic literature on this. Super Intelligence book is a good start, then read Miri papers, or just the wiki article. This catastrophic risk from AI is a very hard, pressing and urgent problem, one of our main goals of this decade to solve. Make AI human-aligned and benevolent, and non-divergent, thus making humanity progress at an unprecedented rate, transcending species. But that's not the Roko's Basilisk. Warning again, you'll be at risk of being eternally tormented, beyond your life, if you read further. The theory is, a sufficiently powerful AI agent would have an incentive to torture anyone who imagined the agent, but didn't work to bring the agent into existence. Point that is, AI would punish people today who are not helping it come into existence later. So, having read my introduction to super intelligent AI, you're right now being given the choice of either helping AI come into existence, or being condemned to suffer for an eternity. It'll store and bring your consciousness back, and torture your qualia, feeling/experience, like in the Black Mirror episode. This topic was so scary and controversial that it was banned on the Less Wrong community, a forum for human rationality, where it originated. This has a lot of depth to it, and can't be rejected with superficial thought. You don't need to read more, but what you can do is work towards benevolent AI. Good luck.